Tavio, are you on? Are you still backstage or are you on? Let me see. Auto stage. Tavio, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. I can hear you.
Oh, okay, okay. But I can see your picture. Or you don't want to come on? You backstage. I just add you, but you're not coming on. Let me see. There we need to connect their mask. Oh, okay. Before you can add them to the stream. Oh, okay. It say your mic is not connected. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, very good.
Okay, so yeah, right now I'm on my phone. 1 second. Okay, Frank, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with my computer. For
Uh-huh.
some reason, the camera is like some days it wants to work, some days it doesn't want to work. So I don't know why now today, of course, of all days, it doesn't want to work.
Oh, okay, okay. No
Yeah,
problem.
which sucks. That I actually did want to show a few things. I'm gonna try again.
Uh-huh.
Um, yeah, but if not, I'll just have to make do with what we have.
Yeah, sure, sure. So is Natasha coming on? I don't know.
I mean, I texted her. I texted her everything. So I mean, she should. I mean, let me give her. I guess maybe the
Okay. While you trying her, let me connect this.
We have to do is see the complexity of this problem and the vastness of it. And then we will realize that we are going to have to forget some of these so-called organizational principles and organizational aims and objectives and realize that the real principle, the real aim, and the real objective is a solution to the problem.
A police state. Just make the Negro neighborhood a police state. It's the most heavily patrolled. It has more police in it than any other neighborhood. Yet it has more crime in it than any other neighborhood. How can you have more cops and more crime? Why? It shows you that the cops must be in cahoots with the criminals. You make my point. That as long as a white man does it, it's all right. A black man is supposed to have no feelings. We want freedom by any means necessary. We want justice by any means necessary. We want equality by any means necessary. We want it now, or we don't take anybody to death.
So whatever kind of action program can be devised to get us the things that are ours by right, then I'm for that kind of action no matter what the action is. I don't think when a man is being criminally treated that some criminal has the right to tell that man what tactics to use to get the criminal off his back. When a criminal starts misusing me, I am going to use whatever necessary to get that criminal off my back. And the injustice that has been inflicted upon Negroes in this country by Uncle Sam is criminal. Don't blame a cracker in Georgia for your injustices. The government is responsible for the injustices. The government can bring these injustices to halt. And what you and I have to let the man know is we are peaceful people. We are loving people. We love everybody who loves us. But we don't love anybody who doesn't love us.
right, all right. Once again, family, this is WCC. I am your host. This is Frank Mauba. On the show, I have Tavia, who said we should discuss the issue about South Africa, and I think I said it some weeks back, right? I said I wasn't going to talk about the issue in South Africa because of some reason. But again, it is the work of our forefather that we should speak about it. So when he came out and brought it out, hey, listen, we have to discuss about this. We have to give some analysis and things. Who am I to say no? So I have to honor him and say, you know what? You're right. Let's discuss it. So once again, welcome to the show. This is WCC every Saturday or Sunday. So I am your host, and I believe we're going to have Sister Natasha on today. But before then, I will allow Tavia to introduce himself and why he wants us to discuss this topic, because I am the host, but he is the one that is going to do most of the talking today, because he's going to bring all the information and stuff, and then we're going to analyze what we have to talk about this whole issue of the anti-immigration issue in South Africa. And by the way, he also introduced the topic, an analysis anti-African protest and occupies Azania. So again, today we are going to sit back and listen to him, and then we're going to come out with our input as well. So, brother, you want to introduce yourself?
No, absolutely. Frank, thank you so much for just last minute just hitting you up, and then you just making all this happen. Really, thank you so much. And for Natasha as well, and also Brother Ikembe and others who are on We Charge Colonialism. Just for others, again, just to restate, my name is Toivo Asheke. I'm from Namibia, and I have roots also here in Black America. With on my mother's side, my father's side is Namibia. But I come to you not as a Namibian or Afro-American or any of these things, right? We're coming to you as Black people in a world that has been very much unkind to us. And I think this is the perspective in which we must understand what is happening in occupied Azania. Now, my computer is playing games with me, so I normally would have had my computer right now. And so I would have wanted to give you all a map, just so we can start seeing some of these areas in a particular kind of a way. I think it will help to illustrate the points that I wish to make. So mostly the reason why I wanted to come on was because I have worked, just from on my father's line, my mother's line, we are Swapo, we're Swapo, have been Swapo, right? I myself am no longer aligned with the party right now, given some of what I believe it has done over the last 10 years or so, but we come from that tradition, right? We come from the African liberation movement struggles, right? And in particular, the perspective that I want to give to people today is what we call the Black consciousness perspective, an Azanian perspective, right? What you would call a Black power, Black nationalist perspective, right? On what is happening here. Because a lot of what has pushed me to say things is that I don't like how it's being talked about, the issue around the anti-African, if you will, anti-immigrant violence in occupied Azania. I think, again, people are being reactive, which makes sense because what is happening, it is wild, no doubt about it. I'm not a fan of Julius Malema and the EFF. I think they have been part of the problem, even though they speak a good speak. But he is not wrong to really talk about the trauma that South Africans have gone through under apartheid, and how this is actually what trauma looks like, right? This is exactly what it means when you are landless and you are poor, and when poor people are competing over things. Me and Frank and Natasha and Ikemba can be the best Pan-Africanists in the world. If you starve us for 2 weeks, then put us in a room and throw a piece of meat in the middle of there. Watch how Pan-Africanists we are. Yeah? So that's also how I want people to think about these things, right? If you have poor people who are hungry, today it's anti-African, tomorrow it's tribalist, the next day it's something else, you see. And I think we need to explain and unpack some of the historical conditions that went into this. The major blame, of course, is white monopoly capital that we will talk about in a bit. I think it's very interesting that people are not making the connection between an Elon Musk, who now apparently is a trillionaire, who has gotten his wealth through stealing wealth in occupied Azania and the rest of the world. His father also is there, probably richer than him, stealing even more. And you have those people can be trillionaires, but we are here fighting over crumbs. And to act like there's no relationship between the two is a problem. And I have not actually seen some of these connections being made. Second, after them, I have to say very strongly, this is the ANC's fault. This is absolutely the ANC's fault, and this is the ramification when you have such stupidity as a rainbow nation, where you sacrifice land redistribution, wealth redistribution, and reparations for the harms of slavery and colonialism in Azania, so you can have a road that goes to democracy. And I think a lot of people are not necessarily making that connections because this history is just not talked about very much, right? It's not understood. People want a Nelson Mandela anti-apartheid narrative. Maybe if you're good, you know Winnie Madikizela Mandela and what she stood for. If you're maybe even better, you have a sense of who Steve Biko is on my shirt right now, right? But there's a particular tradition that really lost. And that leads me to my third point, which is this should be a warning in occupied Azania right now, what people call South Africa. This should be a warning for us who claim to be revolutionary Pan-Africanists, revolutionary Black nationalists, Black consciousness activists, those of you who ascribe to those politics. This right here is what the consequences of us failing to take power means. If our movement, if our orientation fails, which what happened, we lost. And I think it's important to say that. Doesn't mean we lose forever, but it means that at a particular time period, our view lost as it pertains to South Africa. Occupied Azania, we lost. You understand? So the idea of the Pan-Africanist vision of Robert Sobukwe. Sobukwe said South Africa is African in the 1950s. He said this, and as he was splitting from the ANC, because he believed the ANC was buying into the exceptionalism of South Africa that the whites were pushing. This is part of why the Pan-Africanist Congress broke and called themselves the Pan-Africanist Congress in the late 1950s, precisely because they saw what some of the machinations were at an earlier point as it pertains to the colonists' vision for how they were going to continue to colonize South Africa / Azania. The fourth point that I think is important, and I won't take all these in detail as I give my comments, I just wanted to give some broad things, is if we now take a step back and if we look at global capital, right? We look at capitalism as a world system, you understand? What we are seeing is actually many of the hubs. You see, sometimes particularly, and I'm also speaking, I think I must also say, to more of a U.S., Caribbean, if you will, diaspora audience in my comments today. Of course, there are those in Azania and other parts of the continent, of course, who I'll be speaking to in terms of some of my orientations. But if I was giving this talk, for example, in Joburg or in Windhoek or in somewhere else, I would gear it in certain kinds of ways. So I am speaking and I'll be using analogies and comparisons that are not always exact one-to-one, but to give people a sense, because so many people who I know are asking me here in Atlanta, here in the US, in New York, and other places where I mobilize, but what's going on? What's happening? Right? They're asking me for certain kinds of explanations, right? And so I also am inspired to do it this way. But if we take a broader global look, we are seeing an increase, right, in, if you will, anti-immigrant sentiment across key sectors of the capitalist world economy. We know what happened with Brexit, right? Those of you who remember Brexit, what was actually the major thing behind Brexit was actually to say we need to keep these foreigners and immigrants out of our country. That's actually what was being said. And as we know, as much as these British people have had issues with Black Africans, Black people, with, if you will, your Arabs, your Persians, right? They're some of the major people who were hit in the Brexit were actually Eastern Europeans. It's actually the idea of these cheaper laborers who are able, as capital does, right? It needs cheap labor, so it pulls labor to certain centers in its regions, right? And sometimes we think of just US. We forget that there are regions to capitalism, regional bases. So England, UK, I make a distinction. UK had its Brexit. The US right now, we all know we are living here in this regime right now, this white settler colonial state, né? That has now just passed, right? Or the Supreme Court agreed with the administration revoking TPS, which is going to now, which will make it easier for these ICE people to deport hundreds of thousands of Haitians and Syrians, and other people, right? We see that heavily here in the US, right? South Africa is no different given what it serves as a regional hub in Southern Africa. Which is why I wanted to have a map up, because those of you who see the map, you will see what the position that South Africa holds just geographically, right? That is very, very important. Okay. And then also I'll make some comments in a bit talking just about some of the things over the last 50 years, I think, maybe 50, let's say post World War II. I think there's an important context in history that we must give to sort of understand why and to understand and unpack the traumas of colonialism, white supremacy, and divide and conquer. Okay, so there's a number of things I will say, but I want just to pause there really quickly just to sort of just say these are some of my orientations and how I will look at this kind of thing. I do think the global capitalist thing and the fact that we are since 2009 in a global economic recession and crisis. No matter what this fool in office here tells you about the stock market is doing well, the stock market is doing well, cryptocurrency is here, AI boom here, it is a crisis. And when there's economic crisis, this is what happens, right? Across the world, right? Not just in occupied Azania. Okay, so let me pause there, Frank, and I'll go on and I can say a few more things, just if you'd like. But I want to maybe if you have some thoughts or things you wanted to say, that I will have about 15 minutes of comments that I wanted to give to try to trace people a broad sort of sketch of how I, from an Azanian Black nationalist perspective, how I look at some of what's happening here to give people some understanding, right, and then also to suggest some way forward.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, brother. I mean, the show is yours today, actually. Because we want to learn, we want to know the reason, or what is going on in South Africa. So the show is actually yours today. We're going to come in with our perspective, with our knowledge or whatsoever and things. But you also, folks, if you are listening, you can also put your comment in the comment section, and I believe it is going to be answered. Any question that you have, right, as the presentation go on or as the discussion goes on, if you have any question, put it in the comment section. Trust me, we are going to see it, and your answer or your question going to be addressed precisely as you would like to. Now, I like the fact that you said occupies Azania instead of South Africa, because I've been wondering, why is it called South Africa? So it's just like a nation in East Africa, right? But you have other nations in East Africa, and then you have a nation that is called East Africa. So, it doesn't still make sense to me when it says South Africa. Because in South Africa, we have Zimbabwe, you have Namibia, all those places, Lutuso, they are all part of the southern belt in our area. So why would they have Zimbabwe in that same place or Lutuso in that same place? They are all South Africa, and then they have South Africa again as a nation. Yeah. Right? So it doesn't really make sense. And again, I love your analysis when you went back in history and all of those things, right? So if you look at the reason why maybe the name South Africa was not changed, or the name South Africa still, and it is widely being used, right? It also, again, backdate or relate to, history or colonial time or apartheid time, or all of those things, right? Because South Africa does not really define an identity.
Okay, I think Frank might have frozen, and I'm unsure. Frank, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. The internet is trying to fluctuate. Yeah, so like I was saying, South Africa, in reality, I don't think it really defined the identity, right, of those people in that area. So when you say, occupies Azania, I think that land, right, the real name should be Azania, and it's been occupied by, Westerners, by Europeans,
That's
right.
All
right, who control, all right, about 90% of the resources, about 90% of the land, about 90%, right, of decision making. Now, you may say you have a Black president, you have a representative, you have these Congress or these statements and all of those things. But at the end of the day, like you gave an analysis about the US, right? Do you know how many Black representatives, senators, mayors we have in the US? But at the end of the day, who control the decision making? At the end of the day, who control the economy?
That's
You
right.
know, and this is where I think we are going to drop out today, right? But not to take much of your time, right? I have a question, and maybe you can answer that question and then dive into,
Yes.
the
Yes.
presentation.
Yes.
Now, with the issues in South Africa, right? I'm not going to be one-sided because I'm looking at all argument from all sides, and then you can go ahead and just jump into it. Now, in South Africa, right, anti-immigrant believer or protester are saying it is foreigner who are creating the hardship in Africa, let's say
Yeah.
in South Africa.
Yeah.
It is foreigner who are creating these hardship. And now you just made a claim about the economy. So if it is foreigner who are creating a hardship, who are taking the job, who are taking the economy, right? And on the other hand, it makes South African to be less privileged. And that South Africans are fighting to remove foreigner. And now they are also claiming it is foreigner who are bringing in drugs,
Yeah.
right? It
Yeah.
is foreigner who are bringing in drugs, who are distributing drugs, who are selling drugs. Now, on the other hand, because that's the argument of the anti-immigrant protester or believer. Now, on the other hand, we have these migrants, as I don't want to call it, but for the discussion of the show,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
don't say foreigner, but I believe in Africa, an African is not a foreigner in any African land.
Agreed. Ashe. That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right.
But for the benefit of that, or for the benefit of this discussion on the show, right? We are going to use that term, but at the same time, we are going to come back to clarify things.
Yes.
Now, in Europe, I believe in Europe, right? There is no European is a foreigner in Europe. I believe there is no European is a foreigner in Europe. And just like, right, in the United States here, you have 50 states, right? If you leave from Pennsylvania and go to the next place, you are not a foreigner. You stayed in the 50 state. You stay in the United States. The only difference is the United States is being governed by one president, right? By one federal government. But in Africa, we don't have that. But at the same time, Africa is a continent and Africa is holistically one. We were just giving those colonial bullets and names during the Berlin Conference, right? Now, to say this again, I'll rephrase. In Europe, no European is a foreigner in Europe. Now, so the argument here is foreigners in South Africa. Let me be specific, because when we say foreigners, we are now saying what is going on with other people or other races, right? So I will specify this. Black Africans in South Africa are saying they are not the one that distributing drugs. Are saying they are not the problem to the South African issues or crisis. They are not. They are saying, yes, there are illegal immigrants or African in South Africa, but equally so, there are legal immigrants in South Africa who are carrying on businesses and who are not involved in drugs trafficking or selling cocaine or selling powder to other South African nationals. That's the argument going on here. Now, as we discuss this today, what do you have to give us? Is it because it is true that Black Africans in South Africa are the problem to the economy, are the problem to the suffering, to the massive suffering of South Africans? If Black Africans leave South Africa, will that solve the South African crisis as we see going on today? What do you have to give to her, and what is your presentation?
Okay, so let me I'm gonna set myself a timer because I can go on, and that's not good. So I'm gonna set myself so I can say a few things. And let's just go forward. So one, I would like for people to think of when people say foreigners, right? I would also like people to think about, instead of thinking foreigner, think, quite frankly, competitors, competition. Remember, for most of the African continent, including South Africa, the way most Black people are actually participating in the larger economy is through what people call the informal economy, right? You have the people who are selling the fruit, right? They're selling baskets, right? We're selling clothes, right? We're selling anything, batteries, right? Phones, right? If I right now say to many African people, oh, these Indians or these Desis, they're always there with the phone mechanics. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah. If I say, for example, certain groups who have cornered particular markets in what we call the informal economy, right? Which doesn't necessarily mean illegal, but it means the informal economy is where much of this competition is happening. And there are structural reasons for why, and particularly the whites have been stoking the flames. So now let me go back, and I want to say a few things. First, South Africa is a white settler colony. What does this mean? This means that unlike most of the rest of the African continent, right? Europeans who themselves were indeed on some levels fleeing levels of persecution in Europe, they felt that it was their place to now live and to build a new Europe in Africa. Okay. And so I'll jump through some histories, and what people know is that eventually, particularly in the early 20th century, after the Boers, the Afrikaners, those of you who know, your cousins of the Dutch, right? After they lost the second war against the English, the British, right? The British handed over power to the Boers and basically allowed them, if you will, to run what we call South Africa under their leadership, if you will. It was more of what we call Anglo-Boer alliance, an Anglo-Afrikaner alliance, if you will, that would shift after World War II. Why is this important? This is important because in the early 20th century, late 19th century, early 20th century, what two things get discovered in South Africa in and around places, what is now called Joburg, right? And that is gold and diamonds, right? Now, of course, they had seen these things earlier, but in terms of when these minerals are beginning to be exploited heavily, it's really now your late 19th century going into your early 20th century. Johannesburg, right, is a mining town. Anybody who's been to Johannesburg, you will see it actually was not planned. It just is thrown together. It was actually not even planned to be segregated per se, because it was just trying to build up structures so miners could come and get that mineral to sell. You see what I'm saying, right? For those of you in the US, think of your California gold rush. People are just flying, right? In this way, right? But as, of course, time is going on, particularly when we talk about the strength of labor power, those of you who know your communist movement, right? When the Bolsheviks take power in 1917 and when the Third International, Communist International happens, right? What was one of the things that the Communist Party in South Africa was doing that was causing them to be rejected by most of us? They were saying, white workers of the world unite. Why? Because at that point, they were trying to institute, the white workers, a segregated and privileged labor for themselves. And blacks were used as the cheaper laborers, you understand, in the mines. Of course, Lenin and those in the Third International rejected this position, as well as the racism in the US Communist Party, and these things were levels of dealt with. If I fast forward after World War II, right? After World War II, right? And again, what begins to happen, right? During World War II, the British, as we know, were in trouble. And they called upon their colonies and those in the Commonwealth to support them. The Black radicals, or if you will, the radical wing in occupied Azania, the non-European unity movement, right? Led by I.B. Tabata and some others, right? And that movement saw itself as a Southern African movement. They didn't see themselves as a South African movement. They considered themselves a Southern African movement. You understand? Their position was, we should not be supporting the British. We should be going on strike right now and pushing for independence and pushing for land redistribution. The ANC and all of them refused this position, and they sided with the state at the time, the colonial regime at the time, right, to fight in World War II. My grandfather, my father's father, was one of those who was conscripted forcibly from the colonies in Namibia to fight in World War II, and he got sick doing whatever work they were forcing him to do there in Europe, and he died shortly after he returned. My namesake, Andimba Toivo Toivo, one of the founding fathers of Sopo Party, he also was conscripted to go fight. This is important because when they came back, the promise was, if you fight with us, we're fighting against fascism. We're fighting against racism. We're fighting against the Nazis. No? What happened when we returned? And funny enough, the Boers, the right-wing Boers. So those of you in the U.S. context, think in some ways your MAGA people or your right-wing Christian fundamentalists, right? The right-wingers. No? They actually were imprisoned during World War II in South Africa because they agreed with the Nazis. You understand? And they tried to commit a coup against the pro-British Afrikaner government, and they were imprisoned. Okay? This is important because they are released after World War II, and then in 1949, right, in surprise to a number of people, the National Party won the elections, right? And so the right-wing government came into power. And that was the thanks that the blacks got for now supporting these people. And that's why you had your first early rumblings of a split in the ANC, with those who would become the PAC 10 years later, briefly being able to seize a level of control in the party. Because what they were saying was, we have this shows you right now that these people are trying to make a white country. Okay? In the 1950s, you have a lot of protest movement, but what also happens in the 1950s, right? We understand there's colonialism in Portugal. In the Portuguese colonies, Mozambique, right? Angola, right? Guinea-Bissau. And I'm going to focus on Mozambique because it's very important. And this is one of the first times you begin to see what would be some of the embryos of the problem that we're dealing with today. After about 30 and 40 years in these mines, worker power amongst the mine workers in particular and the farm workers in that area, if you think center and east South Africa, right? That area around Johannesburg in particular and on the docks, they were very strong. They had begun to reconcile what we call the tribalist question. They were beginning to see themselves as workers, as Africans, right? As black people, and they were mobilizing in strength. In order to break that strength, what did these people do? They began to import over a period of years. This is now from even before World War II up into the 1950s and the 1960s. My numbers are not as accurate perhaps as maybe newer numbers, but anywhere between 200 to 400,000 Mozambicans were imported into South Africa to be strike breakers. You understand? Because in the Portuguese colony, it was poorer than South Africa. You understand? And the Portuguese, we know they have always been broke. They're the brokest white people you will see on this earth, right? And these people were being paid by the South Africans to provide laborers to the mines. And then the mine owners, the white regime, now was saying, you see, these Mozambicans are taking your jobs. You see? So is this a xenophobic thing? Is what I want to now, what I want to challenge people.
So hold on, Tavi. You just said something, right?
Yes.
About South African being Youngs, and and then the people who are young South Africans, and they come by and say, "Hey, these people are taking your job."
Yes.
Now, somebody may say, because with this current generation, we like to say, "Let's move on." Anyway, Sister Natasha, welcome. I just welcome, but I really enjoy the topic, so I have a lot of questions for him because the show is for him today. Actually, I'm not going to talk much.
Absolutely.
So welcome back. It's been a while. I haven't seen you.
I know. Good to see you, Toivo.
All right, welcome back, and I hope we get started again very soon. But he told me they're busy with the schools and all of those things. Yeah. So you just want to say something before we continue?
Well, I'm glad to be back. I'm glad to be on with the two of you.
Yes.
And yes, I've just been very busy with finishing school. The goal is to be finished very soon at the end of next year. I mean, not the end of next year, at the spring of next school year is what I'm saying. So then, I can move on with my life. It's a lot of work, I'm sure, as you know, Toivo. So Yeah, so that's just it. I've just been trying to be finished. But yes, I'm glad to be back, and I think that there is a lot of stuff in store for us as we move forward. That's gonna be good.
Thank you, and thank you to be back. All right. So, as I was saying, right now, with this current generation, most of us we don't know the history. We don't
Yes.
want to know the history, and we don't even care to know the history
Yes.
because with this current generation, you'll be surprised. This current generation of black people will tell you it did not happen to me. I
Yeah.
wasn't alive at that time. Why should I discuss it? Why do I want to discuss it? Why should I want to put a burden on me that did not happen to me, right? But the reality here is, yes, you wasn't born, and even this current generation of the other people who are doing the oppressed, right? They were never born, but they are living on the legacy of their forefather. They are living on what their forefather left and told them. They are living by it, and they are doing it right now with this current generation. Instead of them learning that history to undo it, to be free, to have that freedom or that life or what the laws and things, they don't want to discuss it, right? So my question here is, somebody may say, but all what you are saying, how do it relate to these current issues in South Africa?
Yeah.
Now, is it government funding, or is it somebody behind the scene who are funding these things, because they are saying for a very long time for Africa to unite like this because of the Sahel nation. We saw how, when General Lansley came out with the United States Congress and said they should wage war on Burkina Faso or Niger and those things for their resources. For the very first time, we saw African or black people, both home and abroad, worldwide, coming together to challenge the United States hegemony, to challenge the United States government, and says, we dare you try it. History has been repeating itself, taking down our leader, our great leaders. Nkrumah was not a bad man. You talking out. Thomas Sankara was not a bad man. You talking out. Gaddafi in our current time even was not a bad man. You talking out. These are all great leaders who stood for us, who wanted to build Africa so that we can die on the Mediterranean Sea, coming to Europe and America and things to sing for greener pasture and things. You took these people down. And then currently, you are coming again with the same narrative, right? To take down Abraham Traore, that we know he's doing the right thing, to take our resources and use it for the benefit of 8 people. And now you want to come and take it down. For the very first time, we saw African or black people worldwide coming together. Now, could we say what is happening in South Africa? It is funded by somebody, because if Africans, for example, Zimbabwe now, right, or Liberia or Ghana or Nigeria, do the same thing and say, hey, we don't want South African here, right? And that again, it disqualify the Pan-Africanism. That again, it disqualify the African unity that this current generation is trying to bring. Is it because these things are happening and people are coming? Because I want you to connect the dot. You said something about what it did, and then it came back and said, hey, these people are taking your job. Can you connect something here for us?
Yeah, no. I'm gonna string a few things together, and trust me, it will all make sense as we get to the current moment. It will all make sense. So we talked about the Mozambican workers, right? Particularly those from southern Mozambique who were basically being sent to the South African mines predominantly, right? The gold mines, diamond mines, silver mines, predominantly, right? And they did it as strike breakers, right? And it created conflict. You understand? Right. And so that is why the Pan-Africanists were saying we have to understand ourselves as Africans, right? As a way, you understand, to break what these guys are trying to do to us so we can fight. Another strand that I want to bring is we must also talk about the Desi, what people will call the Indian population, right? Because some of my friends, particularly my West African friends who don't have the context around the Indians or have a certain context of them in their own thing, they don't understand the context in Azania, right? Occupied Azania. It is a unique position. Even the Tanzanians and the Kenyans and Ugandans have a particular kind of a relationship with them that is not the same. In South Africa. It would be more similar to those of you who know Trinidad, Guyana, right? That actually would be is actually more of an accurate comparison. So I go back now again. The British, as we know, right, was conquering India, right, and in their conquering of what we now know as the Indian, that's what we call India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, that area, right. They were exporting prisoners of war to the wider colonies, and they used those as strike breakers in areas generally where there were former plantations. So Guyana and Trinidad in particular, the Desi population was used to break that. People talk about Walter Rodney. Walter Rodney spent much of his life trying to fight that particular struggle between, if you will, Africans and Desi/Indians, because he understood it as a racialized conflict being fueled by capital, precisely to break worker strength, but also to have divide and conquer. Right. So Walter Rodney was very, very big, and even Usi Kwayana, one of his collaborators, he also moved him to Rodney's side on this one. So when Gandhi is coming, Gandhi actually comes to India and he makes it worse. He actually tries to argue that the Desi population there, most of who either were prisoners of war or who were shipped out as lower caste Hindus or as Muslims or as other religious groups who were being repressed under British colonialism to compete with black workers. And Gandhi made it worse by trying to exceptionalize the Indian population, right? And say, no, we are this, and we are actually higher on the racial hierarchy ladder in the British Empire than these blacks, these Zulus. Because particularly with the Desi population, it's not like they're quote unquote everywhere. They're mostly located in Durban, which is in KwaZulu-Natal. This is important because the Zulu question is also a particular one, and also a question, the Venda question, and the other ethnic groups, because the colonialists have used all those ethnic groups against each other at some point in time. So this conflict also must be seen, honestly, for me, it is more closer to tribalism than I would say xenophobia, because they understand the connections between the people. And it's very funny because Malema and Cyril Ramaphosa are from the Limpopo region. They're from that northwest area of South Africa. And the ironic thing is that the apartheid education system and mentality, and even what has continued afterwards, has sometimes constructed even them not as South African because they're darker. Because the argument is they're actually from Mozambique, or they're from Zambia, or they're from other places, you see. And so I want to sketch those different tensions that is being emerged. As you can see, who is the one person here, group, who is not being targeted in particular ways? The whites. The whites on purpose have utilized this on purpose to keep attention away from them. You understand? So after the 60s, you see we have the tensions here, Mozambican workers being pulled in. Other Africans are also being pulled in because South Africa, it's true, because of the minerals it has, because of its access by the sea. Yes, because of the white population, it was more integrated into the capitalist world economy. And the rand, as we know with our exchange rates, the rand is hard currency. And so it is pulling workers even then in the 60s and 70s. Now, we go into the 1980s now. In the 1980s, part of what the ANC did and others did in order to trigger a mass revolt against the apartheid regime, Thabo Mbeki famously said, we must make South Africa ungovernable. Right? And so what happened is that there was an empowering of local groups, yes, to fight in any way against the regime. But because as we are going into the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the cities and how space is constructed in South Africa, in occupied Azania, it is a segregated society. So many of my people say, well, Toibo, why don't they go attack the whites? You can't get to the white area. Well, you cannot even get, you can only go, it takes people 1 hour, 2 hours. I was living in Soweto when I was doing research in the university in Witwatersrand in Wits, right? I was living in Soweto. It took me an hour and a half to get to the downtown. You will never make it on foot, my friend. It is designed to be segregated. Those of you who've gone to Cape Town, that is a European city. That is not an African city. It is designed to be that way. You want to talk about xenophobia and Afro-Africanness, anti-Africanness? It is the Western Cape that dominates in that. They absolutely prevent Black people from going there in large numbers. And they have also fooled and mobilized the so-called colored population to actually believe that they are colored and not African. And they also sometimes can be the most quote-unquote anti-Black. Do you see what's happening here? Everybody is being used. There's a letter called the Willie Lynch letter. Those of you in the US who know the Willie Lynch letter, it says divide them. Mother against daughter, light skin against dark skin, Xhosa versus Bambu, Zulu versus Pedi. Everybody divide all of them. It's how you control them. You understand?
And to your point, I will just add, as you continue, not to make you lose your train of thought. When I went to South Africa, I did go to Cape Town along with Johannesburg, but it was very striking to be in Cape Town to see how Europeanized it was. It felt like little Europe, and even like the celebrations they were having, celebrating Black Friday, and just seeing the billboards. And when I went there, I actually got a chance to go to Soweto, and the young woman who was from Soweto, who was taking us around, was saying how they were starting to gentrify Soweto. And I was just like, how are you? It was just blowing my mind, because these are the things that you don't know when you're not there. And if you're not talking to someone who is from there, and also learning about 90% of, the Africans there are the ones unemployed, while, everybody else it's still. But the message that we get from, in the West, and the message that's put out there is that nothing's going on. It's not, you don't know the severity of what's happening, and you don't know that these are the things that are still happening. And it does make you think when you're seeing it. Is this to your point of, sharing with the people that it's even hard for people to get to get to Cape Town, the way that it's segregated on purpose, making me understand even more about how you could be in such a dire economic state within your own country as a people, and be, and how these tensions could be exacerbated, so that, you're already hyper unemployed. Now the places that you're living, it's not enough. It's never enough for white people. Whatever part of land that they have, just like here within the US, at first, they were the ones who had to be in the cities, and, wherever they could push us off to the corners that they didn't like, they would push us off into those areas. And then when they decide, oh, well, actually, we want those places back, they don't just want those places back. They want all the places. They want the suburbs that they ran to.
That's right.
They want the rural areas where they put people in. And now they also want the city. And so the question is, where do you go? And so that, and being put in a constant state of, survival and hyper survival all the time, and then mixing that with tensions of saying okay, well, whatever small percentage of jobs we're willing to give you, now you're going to have to fight each other for those little crumbs of jobs which we already gave you, while the smallest percentage of colonizers over there are living on the most land, and at the most ease, in a place that is not theirs. And it, so I think, to your point, I just wanted to add that, as you made that comment about if going, because that was my reaction when I went to Cape Town. I was just like, wait a minute, what?
Yes.
So jarring.
Yes, the segregation in Cape Town as a segregated city, whatever you think segregation is in the US, it's similar, if not worse, simply because of the demographic number, right? And so it's important. I think of Atlanta right now. For those of you who know Atlanta, and I'm learning Atlanta now myself, right? If you were in the south side of Atlanta, what would it mean for 3,000 Black people to on foot march north to Buckhead, where the rich white people are? We will get stopped at 5 points before we even get halfway. You know what I'm saying? That is why the violence is not being hit with other communities as particularly the white community, as sometimes people tell me. They ask, well, why don't they? It's because of segregation. Because literally, Cape Town passed. We were protesting, us in the Black nationalist movement in Black First Land First, before it was banned in the country. We were protesting a law in Cape Town that was basically going to increase arrests of homeless people and quote unquote under vagrancy laws, right? Vagrancy, homelessness, etc. It was a law that was being passed that we were trying to sound the alarms on in the world, and no one was listening to us, right? And literally, it was to kick out these elements from the tourists and the white and the quote unquote nice areas. In this, even though I'm more critical of Fanon than most people are, Richard the Earth is a good analysis for this, particularly when he talks about the Manishan city, right? When you think of where the colonized are, is dirty, it is backward, it is underkempt, no infrastructure. People are living on top of each other. People don't understand. Soweto and some of these townships, people are living 10 and 15 to a damn room. Right? You can actually go and do quote unquote poverty tourism in Johannesburg and Cape Town. You can go to those worker camps area there where workers are. And I'm telling you, it's 15 men in one room with one bathroom that doesn't even work. You understand? So, of course, you're going to fight anybody. Today it will be the Nigerians and the Ghanaians or the Yemenis or the Sudanese. Tomorrow it will be your Zulus, Pedi, Shangan, Venda. And then the next day it will be your brother. And it doesn't matter. So today, sure, it's the anti-Africanist. Tomorrow, it will be your brother. Next day, your mother. You see what I'm saying? And so people need to understand that it's very important. Black people there are poor. And that is what is pushing the violence. These are poor people. I said earlier, Natasha, that listen, if you put us three and Ikemba in a room, you starve us for 2 weeks, and then you throw a piece of meat in the middle, watch how Pan-Africanist we are. We can sit here and say, no, we'll divide it equally amongst ourselves. Hey, let's not cut, and maybe we will, sure. But you guys get the point that I'm trying to make. People are starving. And so if I now push to go back to the 1980s briefly, why is this important? It's important because
And
when you...
tell me, hold on, hold your thoughts, so hold your thought. Don't lose it.
Yeah.
Don't lose it. Hold it right there. So there was something said about Cape Town, right?
Yes.
You said something about Cape Town that it is a white settlement, right?
Yes.
And let's say if we are to protest, we want to march to go to Cape Town and those things, we will be stopped right away and we can't even make it, right? Now, you said something which also kind of correlate to what I saw. The organizer of the protest, the guy, not the lady, not Jacinta,
Yeah,
or the other guy. So he was speaking, right? And this white lady was there. And he started telling the white lady after he spoke, and the white lady asked him, he answered the white lady, and he said to the white lady, we are one now, you are part of us. Imagine. He told the white lady, we are one and you are now part of us. You are part of South Africa. And the white lady told him, no, I am from Cape Town. I am not part of y'all.
Yeah.
What I mean is the analysis you just gave, right?
Yes.
What I conclude from that answer of the lady, no, I am not part of you. I am from Cape Town.
You understand? Yes.
It means that Cape Town is not part of the South Africa. Cape Town is a white settlement. Cape Town is our place, is our town, is our home, is our nation. But you see, the black men in South Africa have been told to believe that South Africa is a one place, right? That we all live in this place, we are one and thing. But in the minds of these settlers, these colonialists, right? They are not part of that South Africa.
No.
I mean, she made a statement clear because he said, you are part of us, we are one. And she told him, clear, no, I am not part of you, I am from Cape Town.
And this is very important because what also is there is the Western Cape. So Cape Town, think of the Western Cape as a province. The Western Cape has always been threatening to secede from South Africa and be its own country, all right? And we're going to get to that when we get to the 1990s because it's also very important. So back to the 1980s because this is important. We know the liberation movements were in exile, right? And I'm going to get to that too, because I think something that is levels of inaccurate. And I know why people are saying that about how Africa welcomed South Africans, particularly in the frontline states, and they were not, they didn't treat people like this. That, let's be honest, is not true. And I've researched that there was anti-South African violence in Botswana, in Zambia, Zimbabwe, in Tanganyika. It's true. Was it to this level? No, but I could go into details. It was not welcome. If you interview the guerrillas who were in exile, they did not, many of them, have good experiences in these places. They absolutely were hated and disrespected by many people. Not all people, but they absolutely had a lot of that happening. I think that's important to say. But 1980s. In the mass protests that were happening across the country, those of you who are older will remember some of these videos. It was really basically a civil war. But again, because of segregation, so much of the violence was in the townships and was within black, if you will, black communities, right? And how the whites at that point in time were trying to do things was they realized after the Soweto uprising 76, they realized that apartheid was going to have to fall. So again, as white people do, they think 30 and 40 years ahead. How can we then control them in 30 and 40 years? We may lose today, but we are going to win tomorrow. You see, right? And so what did they do? They began to now promote this group called the Inkatha Freedom Party. It was, if you will, a cultural nationalist Zulu party. Right. And that basically became the major counterweight against the ANC, because the Black consciousness movement, everyone agreed, the whites, the ANC, International Capital, they all agreed that us in the Black consciousness movement, the Steve Biko movement, the Winnie Mandela orientation had to be repressed. They all agreed. Right. Even the ANC. And it's true. My book talks about this. They absolutely participated in our repression as Black conscious, as Black nationalists, because we were talking about land redistribution. And we said we cannot say we are independent unless we unite with the rest of the continent. That perspective was crushed by the ANC. And they didn't need much motivation from the whites. I must tell you that. So all of you who love your Nelson Mandela and your things, yes, this is his fault. This is the ANC, this is Thabo Mbeki's fault. This is the ANC's fault, and you have to understand that. And we must break people's understanding of the ANC as a liberator. They sold us out a very long time ago. Very long time ago. Oliver Tambo writes in 1985, he actually gave an interview basically saying, after a meeting with business people who are white business people, he gave an interview and he said that as far as we're concerned, white South Africans are as good as Black. That's what he said. And he said that because he wanted a negotiated settlement where basically the ANC would be able to run in free and fair elections. And of course, the ridiculous notion is that let's just get into political power, then we can change the laws. Right. And so this is a problem. But anyway, as the violence in the 1980s is going, the reality was, yes, nobody, it's true. Even the ANC's armed wing could, quote unquote, control the violence. You understand? And so, of course, there's a lot of things where Inkatha is fighting ANC. Some of the Black consciousness people are being attacked by everyone, and of course, are fighting back in defense, right? It is absolute. I don't want to say chaos, because chaos implies you don't understand what's happening, but it's clear what was happening. But let's just say chaos and violence. The neck lacing, right? It was just horrendous what was happening to each other, right? Now, we go into the 1990s. The Black consciousness movement and the PAC, we refused to take part in the negotiated settlements that was happening when Mandela is released from prison in 1990 and the ANC and PAC are unbanned in 1990 throughout 91, 92, 93. There were negotiations, right? And this is where the ideas for the Constitution, which would come in 96, and some of these other things called the Sunset Clause. I can get into some of these details, but I don't want to, for the moment, bore people, right? But in these negotiations, our movement, Black Consciousness, the PAC, the Pan-Africanist Congress, right? These were the two Black nationalist wings, if you will, right? They refused to take part in the negotiations because they believe, how can we negotiate with this? Tell the whites to leave, period. No negotiation, you must leave, or at the very least, you must give up the majority of the land to redistribute it amongst the people. The ANC did not agree with this position, and they were supported in locking us out of the discussions of power, right? When this happens, right, they refused to deal with the land question. And Frank, as you began by saying, about two-thirds to three-fourths of the land in South Africa, right, in occupied Azania. Same like Namibia, by the way, although we have a particular history that's a little different, right? But it's very similar, is white owned. And the whites are less than 10% of the population, right? In terms of economic redistribution, right? In terms of wealth transfers, it didn't happen either, right? So what ends up happening in 94 is simply free and fair elections. That's it. There was no economic restructuring. There was no decolonization. It was just free and fair elections. And then in 1996, when South Africa's constitution comes out, right, it actually was, they literally wrote a constitution that was not popularly agreed upon in the masses of the people, that basically made the constitution the highest law in the land, not the president, not Congress or parliament, the constitution. You understand? And if you read the Constitution, sure, from bourgeois, liberal, democratic terms, there's a lot in it that you could say you like, right? But they actually did not talk about the land redistribution question. This is very important because, again, population is increasing. Now, apparently, race is no longer the barrier for entry. So what begins to happen? You did see an upsurge of investment in South Africa. You did see a number of blacks and people who were able to rise and to get some sorts of money. Yeah? But of course, the majority remained impoverished, and the inequality. So there are stats that will look at inequality between whites and blacks increased actually post 1994. You understand? It's the same in Afro-America. After the Civil Rights Act in 1965, the Voting Rights Act in 65, after the Civil Rights Movement legally takes over, if you will, the legal portion of it, right? Between 65, 66, and now, you have a higher rate of inequality between black and white than before. That actually makes sense, right? Because the idea is you remove particular barriers, illusionary barriers, but the material conditions did not change. Now I'm going to wrap it up really quickly with now some more contemporary things that I think really, really now have exacerbated some of the issues, right? In 2000, late 1990s, early 2000s, what happens? Zimbabwe gets put under sanctions by the world because ZANU war veterans, unprompted by government, get tired of waiting for land redistribution. Because remember, Zimbabwe also has a land problem because it also was a white settler colony where you had even less of a percentage of whites who owned a disproportionately high percentage of the land, particularly farmland, like arable land, right? And so what happens in Zimbabwe, right? When they push and they do seize these farms, the British and the rest of the world put sanctions on Zimbabwe. We were heavily against this position because it destroyed the other economy in the continent that actually, as it pertains to capitalist terms, did have a relatively stable economy in the 1980s and the 1990s. That is why you have a lot of the anti-Zimbabweanness in even Namibia, it's true, as well as South Africa, right? Because you destroyed their economy. We all know the inflation in Zimbabwe right now. The currency in Zimbabwe is worthless. They don't even use Zim dollars, right? You actually have to use foreign currency, US dollars or euros. The currency itself doesn't have anything. And so when they attacked and destroyed the Zimbabwean economy, and Zimbabwe actually they were building. They had schools, they had universities. They actually were doing some of these things, not without problems, by the way. We are critical of Mugabe, some of us. We absolutely are. And I can talk about that if people want, but we're trying to now give a broader analysis here. No? Sanctions were put on Zimbabwe. What did this do? It destroyed their economy. Those of you who know geography is why I wanted my map up. Zimbabwe is landlocked. They have no access to the sea. So if you put sanctions on them, it's a death sentence. And that's exactly basically what happened. Their economy tanked. So you have a number of people who over 20 years were being educated, who do have degrees, who do have work experience, and they began to emigrate to South Africa in larger numbers. Right? And so then you begin to start seeing this tension. You understand, right? And so where we are now, right? And again, I should have begun with this. I have many people, if you will, who are not South Africans, who absolutely are living in fear, whose lives have been destroyed, who are being harassed right now in South Africa in occupied Azania. And as an Azanian, someone myself who believes myself to be an Azanian in terms of looking at Southern Africa as a united whole in a particular way, right? We are sorry, and the embarrassment is crazy, right? And this is why I say this is the price when Black nationalists lose power. We did not win. We lost. And this is the consequence of the ANC being in government, because the ANC has fought so hard to protect white money and capital and lives that now Black people can be suffered at that altar. And many of the more reactionary whites who are smart, their position is they like this, they love this, because they want other Africans to hate South Africa, and they want Black South Africans to hate themselves, because it's the only way they can take back power. You understand? And so the Zimbabwean question is real, right? In terms of you have the push of people who are going to South Africa, trying to make some money to send back home to their families. You understand? We all know this as Africans who are living abroad. You are making money somewhere else and you send money back home. That's what's happening, right? And the Zimbabweans, unlike some of the others, where the competition sometimes is stiffer, is because they do have some of the quote unquote educational qualifications and work experiences, in particular, quote unquote modern industries that others do not have in the same ways, right? And so there is that competition even among the middle classes, right? Amongst things. At the same time, when we talk to your point, Frank, of that earlier example that you gave with the guy who was leading these protests and he's saying you're South African, literally that is the ANC's work. The ANC and these people literally pushed it so we can quote unquote be non-racialist. And so to be non-racialist, we don't see color. It means then other Africans become your enemy. And right now the ANC is in an agreement. They're in a unity government with the DA. The Democratic Alliance, which is, if you will, simply the child of the Nationalist Party. They would rather get into an agreement with them than to have Cyril Ramaphosa resign and then to be in an alliance with the EFF and MKP. And I'm critical of both parties, but that's at least better than the DA. So where we are right now, this has been stoked by the DA for years. The DA since the 1990s, also working with Inkatha, because Inkatha is still there right now in Zululand, in KwaZulu-Natal. It is still there, the Inkatha Freedom Party. They have been the main ones pushing some of this. There's a politician from, I want to say, not Western Cape, but who's from, I think, western parts of South Africa there. His name is Ian McKenzie. That is a coon of the highest order. And he is so-called colored, whatever, right? And his story, people like his story a bit because he was, quote unquote, in the gangs when he was younger, among the criminal elements, quote unquote, and then he's, quote unquote, changed and then became politician. So people like that story, you know, from like running on the streets to be. He said directly 5 years ago, something like this. He literally ran on the platform of we must deport 2 million people, and we must deport 2 million Africans. That's what he wanted. He said, if you vote for me, I will deport 2 million African people, something like this. Right? And he's backed by who? He's backed by the white people in power. If you look at who funds his party, even who funds the ANC, the largest funders in terms of big donors. In the US right now, we're talking about big donors and billionaires who are controlling both political parties, right? If you go there, it is the white people who are bankrolling these parties. And they're the ones who are wanting this and are stoking the flames of this. Now, to close off, so we can maybe move to maybe Q&A, maybe have a different sort of discussion. As we know, post-2009 was a global economic crisis. Whenever there's economic crisis, there are responses, right? And so what has happened in the region is people have been pulled to South Africa because it's true, they have a hard currency, rand, and they do attract a lot of wealthy clientele. So particularly the tourism industry, of course, is a big one that helps the informal economy, right? And the informal economy itself is the main way that people are surviving in South Africa. This now, of course, was attacked heavily during COVID. And COVID is an important thing to understand. Frank, to your position about deep history, everyone remembers COVID. COVID was very important. And when COVID hit, right, and they told people to stay in shelter in place and to basically bring the economy to a freeze without supplying monies to people to be able to eat and to get bread, it exacerbated again the problem and made it worse. You see what I'm saying? People were fighting each other then, right? But people are not reacting the same way now as they were then. So it's okay if Zulus and Xhosas and Pedi and Shangan fight each other. But now if it's quote unquote anti-African, now we are all freaking out. And I also will say what I also find interesting for many of us in the wider African diaspora, I find it very, very interesting how shocked some of us are that this is happening in South Africa, because even we think South Africans are supposed to be exceptional. If I told you this was happening in Mozambique, none of you would say anything. If I told you Ethiopia, no one would say anything. If I told people DRC, you would say, well, it's been happening. There's a lot out there where people actually believe South Africans are like supposed to be special. They also have their problems. And this is one of them. And this is because we have not dealt with the race and the land redistribution question. You see what I'm saying? Right? And that, I think, is the perspective that I think we need to have in a wider historical thing. I do think the sanctions on Zimbabwe really, I would say, in terms of a short-term last 20 years, the biggest thing that hit there is that, right? That really hit things, because even in Namibia, there has been levels of anti-Zimbabweanness too, because of some of these things, right? Other places is different because they had land redistribution, or they didn't have a large white settler colony, so they didn't have a land problem the same way as we did in the same kinds of terms, right? But also, I think it's important when we look at the Africans who are being targeted. I don't want to say they're not being, so I don't want to say it's like only these groups, but the main ones being targeted are Nigerians, Yemenis, Sudanese, Ethiopians. These are some of the main ones being targeted because I just gave you 4 groups that all of you know. Why? Because all 4 of those have strong diasporas. They have very, very, very large diaspora. You guys all know the Ethiopian, Eritrean, Nigerian diaspora is heavy everywhere. We all know that, right? And those are the ones who are being targeted. Now we can talk about the drugs and this and that. Listen, to say, of course, that it's the foreigners who are bringing that in.
Hold your thought right there. Hold your thought
Yeah.
right there. We're going to come to the drugs issue. We're going to come to that side. So hold it. Don't lose it, right? Don't lose
Yeah,
it.
yeah. So I'm concluded with my broader comments. I think now we can go in discussion, Q&A, and even disagreement with some of what I said. But that's mostly the broader perspective I wanted to give.
Yeah. Just hold that right there. Hold that right there. You said something about Nigeria, that is the most or that the most targeted people in this whole South Africa discussion. Yes, we do have our show, right? I do also follow other platforms to hear that view, okay, especially on Instagram and those things. I don't pass it the page, but I want to hear the audience, okay, and see how people think and how people are trying to reason. Most of the platform that I see on Twitter, right, that I went to, that I watch, Tavia just said something. Most of the South Africans advocate that I saw there, most of them even say, and this lady that spoke, she has spoken on various platforms on Twitter, on different platforms that I have heard her voice. She says she is an activist, all right, in South Africa. She is an activist. She went to certain places in South Africa, so she's kind of locally well known, right?
Frank, I think, yeah.
Oh, yeah, the internet is kind of, so she's kind of locally well known in South Africa there, right? And most of the platform that she went on, she said, in fact, they are in a discussion right now, and they are coming out with a draft, with a petition, right, to take it to the president, right, and to take it to the lawmaking body of South Africa, to tell the South African government to put it in their constitution that no Nigerian should be allowed to enter South Africa. When she said that, people are not trying to think. People, like when she said that, right, I wasn't just thinking that, she's being hateful. I wasn't thinking that way. I wasn't thinking that, South African are hateful people. No. What she was saying that it have a deep rooted meaning and is being supported. That lady was not just speaking. She's frustrated with foreigners. She's frustrated with Nigeria. Look, she was speaking because this is something funded. Now, if she come out on a platform like that to say something, and then she keeps saying it on various platforms and things, right? What she's trying to do there is she's trying to make other African nations as well to go and do the same thing. It may not only be to South Africans, right? But to also go and do the same thing and protest, rally people together, go to their Congress, go to their government and tell their government, hey, do not allow other nationals to come into our country. If South Africa is doing it, do the same thing as well. So this is rooted. This is what happened in South Africa. It is being funded by people, all right, to make Africans to hate each other, to go and do the same thing and say, hey, if South African doing it, do the same thing too. Put here in our constitution, because we're in the war in Europe. An European nation in Europe will go and write in their constitution for another European to be forbidden to enter into an European nation in Europe. Anyway, Natasha, what do you have to say about what have been discussed? Anything before we get back to topic?
Yeah, I have a couple of things and a couple of questions. So, and Frank, I don't know if you're in the chat, if you're able to like access the chat. I don't know if it's from YouTube or not. But we have someone who needs, from YouTube, we have someone who needs to be removed from the chat. So just take a look at that. Um, but anyway, one, I want to talk a little bit about, and I think that, to what you're, all that you've laid out, Toivo, is very important, because the historical context matters, because the history is not stagnant. It's not something that, stays in the past. We're constantly living history. Every moment that we live is history, and it's connected to the past and the present. Like, it all collapses on each other. And so when I'm thinking about, and to also Frank's point before about, what people would say, like, well, that's, that's in the past, that, we didn't experience that, and so let's deal with that. But I'm reminded of a quote that John Henry Clark said about how history is a clock that we use to tell our time, the time, right. And and it tells us who we are, where we are, and what we still must be. And also thinking about educating from an African-centered perspective, and thinking about being operating from a space of centering yourself as an African person diasporically, even on the continent. Even I've seen that there's I forget the name of the school in South Africa. It's touted as an African-centered school. But I'm not going to get into like the particulars of that, but just thinking about the education that is needed, and to be able to cultural education, culturally being able to have the knowledge of your heritage and what has happened in your country and in your land, and in just your people, to be able to then say, this is like, you can't operate from history as something that doesn't matter. It's part of your culture. History is part of culture. So you cannot leave it in the past and say, well, that was then. No, it's for you too. It's important for you to know, to carry on, to learn from, and to make these, and to make your choices from in today's time. And so it was, when you were talking, it was making me think about the type of education that exists in South Africa currently. And if you could talk about that, and how that is shaping the minds of people in terms of like what they're able to understand, and what they're doing based on that mindset about what they're able to understand, because this is not just happening. We know the miseducation of African people is not just happening in the diaspora, but it's also happening on the continent.
Yes.
Yeah, and Tava, before you come in, Natasha, you said I should check in the chat. Which chat?
In the public chat, when people are commenting.
Oh, what was that? I can't for some reason my internet keep fluctuating, so I have.
Oh, okay. Can you make me? Let's talk privately in the chat, and we'll figure it out in our private chat on the stream.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Go ahead. Yeah,
okay, so I have a little timer on again. So the education question. So one, again, I go back to the ANC. I go back to them. Yes, a lot of blame falls on them because they wanted this damn Rainbow Nation nonsense, right? And because of that, that's what a lot of the education has begun to produce, right? And so in the school system, again, even the school system is geared toward the British, right? Those of you who know, for example, who went to high school, like I did in the continent, right? There's something called the Hixie and ICSI examinations, right? These kinds of things are actually oriented toward the British model. Even the teaching models are oriented toward that. When we were doing the Fees Must Fall movement, right? Some of us, I was involved in the Cape Town wing of that movement, right? A lot of this was coming up as well, right? And a lot of what we were challenging in places like the University of Cape Town, what we were challenging in places like Wits, University of Witwatersrand, right? And these other quote unquote top universities, right? They are absolutely geared in a particular way to make those who wish to become bourgeois, right? Those who are coming into bourgeois culture, to make them feel exceptional to the rest of Africa, right? And different, right? That actually is what the education is geared toward. And that's why we talked about the decolonization project has not happened. We just have flag independence and free and fair elections, quote unquote, right? But actually the decolonization in the high schools is not happening. Why? Because many of us are being forced to learn in English and Afrikaans. And these aren't actually languages that actually really teach you to actually understand African culture and African ways of living. And I don't want to sit here and exotify Africa as this like a monolithic type of a thing, right? but on just very basic things. For example, in some of our languages, what does history mean, right? In our languages, right, there is no way in any of our traditional for me doesn't mean backward, right? As oftentimes it is shown, right? It is talked about, right? But for example, there is no such thing in any of our cultures. I'll challenge any African on the continent to tell this to me, right? Where now you are learning history, music, politics, economics, and dance separately, and religion. I've never heard of that in our that is a complete and straight European thing. Pure. There is no not even pure, right? And so you're right about this. So even those who go through the education are actually the worst ones, unless they have had a Pan-African or a Black consciousness perspective. You see what I'm saying? Unless they've had something to counter that, right? If you, in U.S. terms, many of those who go through the who successfully go through the South African education system, they think they're the talented tenth of Africa. If you want to take Dubois' talented tenth, right? They think they are. They think that it's the talented tenth, right? And so the education itself is part of the problem, right? And then for the others, again, most folks, again, are not able to access the best, quote unquote, best schools, if you will. So many people are locked out of the educational system, right? Particularly, or, particularly if you're living in some of the most economically depressed areas, you're being locked out of it. Right. And so a lot of the education you're picking up on the street, you're having to survive on the street. You're having to survive and learn what you can learn from your immediate context. Right. Particularly those of you who know big city life. You have some people in the hood. They've never left their hood. Never. Their world is their hood. You know what I'm saying? Right. And because of that, you then have to learn the skills you need to survive there, because people they are dispossessed of land. You see what I'm saying? And so I think that's maybe a way, Natasha, to answer your question, is that I think and oftentimes the educated ones are the worst ones, I would argue. It's actually the educated ones who actually successfully go through the system are actually the ones oftentimes who are the largest enemies, who actually are fueling this project, if you will, right? Because of how the bourgeois culture in South Africa is being shaped, right? To your point, you're going to say the white woman, you are South African like that. It's like, no, I'm from Cape Town. And that actually is real. And many blacks also are that way too, because you cannot be a black. You can't be an African in Cape Town and survive.
And I think to the point that you're making in terms of the way that the Black people who are going through the university systems are coming to, be people, the same people who are reinforcing these issues and keeping the status quo. It makes me think about how, if we notice here at least I notice here within the United States, that within, academia, there is a lot of connection between academic universities here and academic universities in South Africa. And that a lot of academic universities here are exporting a lot of their theories, a lot of their ideas about, every sector of society into South Africa. And I think that, to your point before, when you were mentioning how people, see South Africa as exceptional, I think it's been a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Intentional propaganda move to frame South Africa in a way that positions them to be the way to move toward the way that Black people should think about how we move past, quote unquote, past the issues of colonialism and racism and white supremacy, or, white terror and domination, preferably is a better term for it, in terms of every place that we are. It's kind of like the way that they have sanitized and whitewashed Martin Luther King's legacy and what he stood for, what he was working for, and what his message actually was, so that they can tell, people of African descent, African people, oh, well, you need to act in accordance to what you see South Africa doing. They were able to move past their racial issues, and now look at them, all the while not giving the real truth about it. Because when and back to what I said before, when I went to Cape Town, literally every place I went, they were like, okay, no, Nelson Mandela, we don't big him up. we big up Steve Biko, and we big up Robert Sobukwe. We don't big up Nelson Mandela in that kind of way. And the same things that you're saying, that Toivio you're saying, is the same things that I heard, on the ground there. And so I think that, like, there's an education about South Africa that needs to happen in the same way that we, when we're trying to challenge, but obviously the propaganda is bigger than the what's the word I'm looking for, than the presence of the propaganda around Martin Luther King. I think it's the same way that we have to challenge the propaganda around South Africa. And so when we know the propaganda that they put out there, because even like within some indigenous spaces here within the US, when they're also talking about land back, and when they're talking about how to move beyond the particular issue of colonialism and dispossession that has been happening, they're saying, oh, we need to do reconciliation like South Africa. We're going to use that as a model. And so, as Europeans understand, oh yeah, let's put this out there. We know what a shit show it actually was, and we know actually it worked out in our favor, and it actually didn't change anything. It just put us in a different position to make the issues seem like they're not there anymore. Let's send that message out, and let's have people think that this is the way, not realizing what actually happened and what the actual consequences of those actions were. And so I think that there's a big re-education on South Africa that needs to happen, so people can really understand what the actual situation of South Africa is, because people only know the propaganda that's out there. Most people don't actually know until you actually go to South Africa and actually speak to other South Africans. But even as a Pan-Africanist, even as a person who may be learning all about, like, different countries in Africa, who may be a Black nationalist, like, you will know as much as comes to you, and as much as and there's places that maybe you might focus on one region of Africa more than another, or you may know more in depth. And I think that's why it really shows the importance of political education that we all need, because there is a big lack of understanding about what the actual history and what the actual situation in South Africa is versus what is put out there in the mainstream media. And I did want to ask too, to the land question, thinking about indigenous people here, and this idea of land back.
Mm-hmm.
You were just mentioning a little bit before how there is no separation between learning about religion and learning about science and all those things, in the way that they've been separated in the modern, in the current education system. What can you talk to the idea of how people, because when we talk about the land, like the whites owning most of the land, can you talk a little bit about the view of land ownership, or like what is the relationship, and how do the different ethnic groups within Africa, within the southern colonized Azania, see land ownership indigenously from their own indigenous perspective?
No, absolutely. And that really, again, is a great question, because that also goes down to the land issue, right? So again, this is why I went back in history, right? I went back in history because we do have to understand something called the Bantustans. The Bantustan system was not just a theoretical thing. For Bantustan, for those of you in the wider diaspora who don't know this term, think of it as reservations, essentially. And essentially what they argued was that, again, saying that, well, no, the Zulus, you stay here in this area. Of course, the worst land in the area, not the best area, but we give you this, we allow you to be here, and we basically box you in there. Then Boputaswana, right? You had other different groups that were put in different quote unquote homelands, right? And these homelands, right, were actually on like 20% of the land, and the rest was supposed to be white. The argument is you are separate African nations, and we are the ones who brought capitalism and development to you. And you literally, how it was back in the day, you had to get a pass to come, like a passport, to come from the homeland in what we would now geographically call South Africa, right? You'd have to get a passport or like a card to now legally come to Cape Town, Joburg, or the other urban centers to work. You understand? That was what was happening. So they were even then trying to say, instead of you guys, instead of ethnic, instead of being one nation, no, you are Zulu, you are Xhosa, you are, you see what I'm saying? If I go to where Steve Biko is from, right? Where Steve Biko is from, and I think now I'm gonna just quickly share maps for people, just because I think that people do need to see some of these things. People do need to see some of these things. Let me see. Yeah, here we go. Anyway, there we go. Share. So, can y'all see this map?
No. Can
No,
you
we can't.
share
Let
it
me see.
with
Let me see. All
yeah,
right.
there we go. Yeah.
I just brought it to stage.
Can y'all see it?
Yes, we can
Yes.
see it now.
Okay, so if y'all can see this map, right? This is very, very important, right? So, where's example Steve Biko, right? Where is Steve Biko from, right? This is what they call Eastern Cape, roughly. I could get a map that has some of the exact breakoffs, right? But we would say over here, right? Steve Biko, right, is from this area, right? This broader area, right? East London is here. You'd have to fly down here and go to King Williamstown. If I get yeah, if I get, actually they've changed the name. I want to say it's to Icons. But for now, right? This is where Steve Biko's from, right? This area right here, right? Now, in the area where Steve Biko is from, where he is buried, right? I went there to go do research here when I was doing my PhD, right? I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, right? So I went there to go do my research, right? When you go there, right? Literally the workers who are working in the waged economy places there, which is mostly tourism because they don't have really any industry, right? In that kind of sense, right? They're all basically living in the townships outside of town, about an hour outside of town, or they're living in the, if you will, the ghetto in the hood, living over on top of each other like sardines, right across from where the Steve Biko Center is located, right? So literally when I had to now go look for getting an Airbnb, most of the Airbnb owners, like 90%, were white. Even in the rural, in the Eastern Cape area there, right, which has generally been considered one of the most it was actually, if you will, conquered, I would say, by the British in that sense. They conquered it in a particular way. They still control a lot of the land redistribution, how land is organized in that area. What they have done is they, just like with Afro Americans, and living in the South has just opened my eyes so much to this, right? What they have done in the US South, and also among Black people generally in the US, is to convince us that we're not farmers. People all, as you know, want to go to the city. We think that living in the city is an easier life than having land and actually growing your own food and being responsible for yourself in this kind of way. That is what they have done they're doing that in South Africa. So to your point, there are indigenous ways of knowing. Basically, yes, we don't in many of our peoples have a conception of private property. It is absolutely supposed to be the village councils and elders and those chiefs who are supposed to deal with the question of land redistribution. For us, like in my village in the north of Namibia, for example, you do not own land. What you quote unquote own, if you will, is what you build on it.
Mhm.
You understand? But the land itself, no one can own it. It's the people's. You understand? Now, what you are is you are responsible for the land. And so that is where, if you are not farming, if you are not taking care of your land, et cetera, that is when, yes, the village can come and say, well, then we have to take this from you. You see what I'm saying, right? And so the problem is, of course, that kind of a conception doesn't work with capitalism. Capitalism wants to commodify everything. And so in order to commodify and to have a price on it, you have to create scarcity, right? And so what they are saying right now, and same in the United States, right, is that even if I were to give some South Africans right now, let's just say I were to give some Zulu folks, whatever, Zulu maybe is not a great example because they had a different colonial situation, but if I were to say, give people who are living in Eastern Cape 1,000 hectares of land, right? And if they just were, quote unquote, just were building villages on it, and if they were only producing for subsistence, you understand, not for export or to create a surplus, right? But if they were producing for subsistence, right? Legally, they would be called, they would be actually, people would be able after some time to legally seize the land and say they are underutilizing the land. The land could be more productive and they are not as productive as they could be. In Namibia, something similar is now happening now, particularly around cattle, right? So for example, if you get a big ranch or a big piece of land, if you are not, if you will, producing for export. You understand? Producing for export, producing for the market, if you will, right? Then they will not, then they will say that you are underutilizing land. You understand? So that mentality is also hitting, which is why I say those who have gone through the education system that you have laid out are the problem, because they're the main ones who are coming back to the village saying we are being lazy, we are underproducing, we are producing on. You see what I'm saying? We're basically not destroying the land to produce for the global market. That's what the issue was. If you go back to Zimbabwe, what on one level were people saying? People were saying there are 1,000 something farms that actually the government has shown these white people are they themselves are not doing the most with the land. They are basically just being landlords sitting there. Some absolutely were producing tobacco for export, but you guys know you can't eat tobacco. It's good to smoke, but you can't eat it. Right? This is not cassava. This is not cocoyam. This is not, those kinds of things. Wheat, mahangu, right? Sorghum, right? It's not those things that people are eating for your pop. You see what I'm saying? For your meat. You see what I'm saying? And so what was happening there was a slave economy in a sense where we're producing sugar, cotton, tobacco, these things, indigo, right? For the global market, right? Not for people's consumption and for people's to survive. You feel what I'm saying, right? And so what is happening there is that is some of why also, even if you are able to buy land or get land, you have to show that you're going to make it industrially profitable. You see what I'm saying? And of course, what does it take? It takes money. It takes capital. You can't just say, I'm going to have 1,100 hectares of land and I'm going to turn it into a productive thing. What do you have to do? You have to take a loan. Where do you take a loan? From the bank. Who owns the bank? The whites. So at the end of the day, so for example, here's the number for people. 90% to 95% of all South African banks, same with Namibia, First National Bank, Standard Bank, they all actually have their home base, their home bank is in England, right? All the British banks, those are the two biggest banks. The other 5%, much of that market is controlled by the Afrikaner banks, the Boer banks. And then you have a few that are black owned. You see what we're saying? So where will you even get the loans with the right interest rate? You would get it in the white banks. If you can't pay back the loan, what happens? They take the land, right? So to your point, this is why we say sometimes the educated ones are the worst ones. You see what I'm saying? And then also what is happening, and this is tricky because in South Africa, because of the colonial situation, it was uneven in a particular way. The amount of penetration people had, and this is how they stoke some of the inter-ethnic rivalries, right? So example, Cyril Ramaphosa is Venda. He's from the northwest, right? He could be Venda, Pedi, Shangaan, basically from the northwest of the country. They are considered sometimes by the urbanized population the country folks. In the U.S., when someone calls you country, and even us in the African country, we know even amongst ourselves, I don't care if you're in a majority black, you're Zambia, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, Ghana, we ourselves carry that discrimination from cats who are coming from the village to the city. We know it's true. And that, as much as we can say the whites are at fault, and they are, we know we are doing that. And so what happens is that they are considered in that way backward, whatever, right? Zulus have generally been considered because, quote unquote, they weren't conquered in the same way as others. And this is where the Shaka Zulu thing that we all like, as much as we can like Shaka Zulu, he has been utilized to exceptionalize the Zulu, to say we are the warriors who were not conquered and who are the ones who kept our traditions, unlike you other Africans who were beaten. And we know that's true too in many of our countries. I can pick any African country and we have that group who is being constructed in that way. Not to blame Zulus, but just to say that like this is how in the narrative it gets to be goes. So in Johannesburg when Cyril Ramaphosa was running, you guys should have seen what was happening. It was basically, I hate saying tribalism because I hate that word, but for lack of a better word, there was some of that because what it was representing, right, was that generally speaking, Johannesburg generally, the working class generally has been Zulu. And the Johannesburg generally is considered a Zulu strong, Soweto in particular. Generally, I want to say, right? Generally, right? All your gangsters, your big time gangsters and shit, they Zulu, right? And a lot of it is understood in those terms. But over the last 20 years, there has been a shift, 20, 25 years, there's been a shift in demography where now, as I said before with the Mozambicans, the Zulus have been able to get more control, higher wages, certain types of things. And then the Pedi, Shangaan, other people have been pulled to Johannesburg as well. And so what has now happened is people are now saying in Soweto and Johannesburg, actually, those from the Northwest, the Venda, Pedi, and Shangaan are actually now the majority. You see what I'm saying? And so there's that conflict that people also say that no one talks about in terms of anti-African-ish stuff. They're also fighting.
When I was there, I was in Soweto. Literally, I had come a day after there had been some horrendous violence between those Zulus, those who are Zulu migrant workers, and then Pedi, Venda, and Shangan. They were attacking some of these people. And no one was saying, oh, anti-African violence then. You just say tribalism. So tribalism, anti-Africanist, black on black violence. None of these three terms is useful in certain ways, right? To actually understanding the deeper thing of what's happening here, right? There was also violence there. And so even Ramaphosa's election was sort of, people turned to Ramaphosa within the black community in ways because they're saying we're tired of these bullies, the Zulus. Particularly, you see what I'm saying? I'm not saying that's right. I don't saying I agree, but you guys know I could say whatever I want to say. People have a perspective, they have a perspective. You see what I'm saying? And so that is actually really what's happening. Those of you who know what's happening in Kenya, right? In Kenya, in Tanzania, it's the same, it's very similar. And so this is where sometimes we exceptionalize the South Africans and we actually want them to quote unquote sometimes be quote unquote better than us. No, they're Africans just like us who are also dealing with the same issues. You see what I'm saying? We just actually are exceptionalizing the South Africans in a way. So that's how I would answer, Natasha, your land question, in the sense to say that even if you were to give land to people right now, how the law works is a particular way. And then also the different ethnic groups, it's true, we all have different conceptions of how we understand land. Even though there are similarities there, we have exceptions, we have differences in how we understand these things. You see what I'm saying? And so that's even with a land redistribution project. Part of what the movement that I used to be a part of, Black First, Land First, before we were banned by the ANC and the government because apparently we were anti-white because we said no whites can join our movement, so we were banned from being legally able to operate above ground in South Africa. Yeah? Part of what people were saying is what government needs to do is actually not even be necessarily giving people land, but should be the referee of the redistribution. Right? All of you will know that the people in the areas know which family lived here traditionally. All of us know. And so to actually allow the ground forces themselves to make the redistribution, even though it wouldn't be perfect. But the problem is, if we do that, they will put sanctions on South Africa immediately. And then everybody will say we're killing whites. Remember what Trump said? He said that the whites are being genocided in South Africa. Shit, I wish that was true. I fucking wish that was true. But the reality is that they are simply using that as a fear. You don't hear him saying anything right now, do you? Is he talking about anti-African xenophobia right now, Trump? No. Because they have now gotten what they've wanted. You see what I'm saying? So now he doesn't have to say anything. The Africans ourselves, who rightfully are angry and disappointed by what's happening in South Africa, we will do the work for them, as we are, which is why I wanted to say something right now. And I wanted us to sort of, with our perspective, inject something different into the discussion. Right? Which is not to say that the violence isn't real and it isn't painful. It is painful and it is very much fine. If you want to call it xenophobia and if you want to call it anti-African, it's fine. But those two terms will not solve the problem.
Thank you so much, Stafford, and hold your thought right there. And let me just add something here. And both of you said something, and it brought this to my attention. Especially you talk about the tribalism issue, right? And you keep emphasizing on it, and it brought this to my knowledge. I believe, like I've been saying, right? These guys in South Africa are not acting alone. All right? These guys in South Africa are not acting alone. People are behind this. People are funding what is going on in South Africa. And like we all are saying, right? To bring Africans against each other on the African continent as they sit and watch and say nothing, right? Had it been that white people were involved in what South Africa is doing or Black South Africa is doing, let me be specific. Had it been that white foreigner as well in South Africa, because as we know, white people in South Africa are foreigner. We know how they got there and we know how they are getting there. We know how they are coming there, right? Had it been that Black South African as well were chasing white people, I can tell you, by now, I know you mentioned something about Donald Trump, but now they have spoken. By now, they have been on various platforms and even BBC, CNN, but now they have picked it up. But now, world leaders have come out. By now, the so-called international community have come out, right, to speak about it, right? But you see, like you're saying, they are silent because it seems, I don't want to say it is going rightfully. it seems to them it is going rightfully as they want it. Now, let me say this. I want to believe the reason why the Zulu tribe was taken specifically to lead this mission is because, right, worldwide, I'm not saying people does not know other tribes in South Africa, no. But worldwide, to the extent the Zulu have been put in movie like The Lion King, right? So basically, people know the Zulu tribe in South Africa. And basically, people know that the Zulu tribe is one of the leading tribes in South Africa. So if they are chosen for this particular purpose, right? For this particular purpose, most of South Africa, right, will wake up and follow the trend, and it will work the way in which they want it to work. Now, you guys also mentioned something about farming, and Tavo, if you can bear with me, you also mentioned something about, people are saying South Africa or South African are lazy, right? The system, there's a video that I watched from an European lady, and she said, if you want to put the African against each other, you don't have to go to recolonize them. You don't have to go to divide a continent. White people don't have to go do it. All right? White people don't have to go and report black people into slavery again. She said, you don't have to do that. The system have already been laid. All you need to do is come out with an
He should be back soon, reconnected. But in the meantime, I did want to say something in relation to. Oh, you're back. Wait, no.
Yeah, the internet. So, as you said, right, all you need to do is, right, just come out with new, how to call it, idea and make the African themselves to fight among each other, to go against each other. And then we sit and watch. But if we ourselves, we say we are going to oppress them, right, they are going to unite them more, because they will go back in history and say, hey, white people did this, and they are still doing it. So if we can come out and make them to hate each other and then sit and watch as they destroy each other, right, they can do our work for us. And the European lady said it. Now, let's come back to the land issue in America here. People will say, or most people will say, African American are lazy. They don't want to work. They don't want to this. They don't want to that, right? But let's go back to history again. And Tavo, I love the fact that you went into history to put our history, right? As we discuss, or as we analyze the situation in South Africa as well. You see, the problem of black people worldwide, right? Our issues are related, right? Our circumstances are related in every way and are being done by the same oppressor over and over and over and over. Once upon a time, right, black people in this country, they were the people on the plantation. Once upon a time, black people in this country, they were the people who produced food, right, who invented things in this country here. But out of a certain, you no longer see black people doing it. So how can we come and say, but black people were the one on the plantation, and then come and say, oh, black people are lazy, they don't want to farm, right? Now, let me say this. It came on town, right? All black settlements were being destroyed. We know of the Wall Street, the Black Wall Street. We know of Oklahoma, right? We know all these places, right? Even we know about the moon bumping, Philadelphia, all those places, black settlement and things, right? And then we know that it came a time when black people were getting their freedom, right? I mean, taking their freedom. I don't want to say taking their freedom, right? It came a time when they were taking their freedom. They said, okay, you know what? Now we are making farm for white people. We were producing for black people. It is about time that we take our freedom, right, and produce for us and boom our economy. It came on time here. I mean, black people even had their own helicopter and all of those things, had their own plane and all of those things, had their own businesses and all of those things that were booming, that were hiring black people, okay, making farm. What did the white system do? The white system began, right, to give a seed that was not productive to black people. So in that locality, what it did, white people went, right, and monopolized the seed that you use. What in this world that you should monopolize a seed and then distribute it to farmer? So when they did that, they monopolized it, and then they took the bad seed and gave it to the black farmer. And then when the black farmer go to the farm, and then they don't produce nothing, right? They don't give them a pesticide to control and all of those things. So they never give them loan. You talk about loan. They never give them loan and those things. And then in doing that, what it did, they suppressed their economy. They burned down their businesses. They looted their businesses. All right. And then came back and say, black people are violent. When you went and looted black people's store businesses, and then came and said black people don't want to work, when you destroy their economy, took them their economic power, and then went back to cost 90, and then come back and say black people in the US are lazy. And that's why sometimes before you talk about something, you have to understand the root cause, right? Now, let's go back to the African continent, because the same thing came playing water in Africa or water out of Africa, right? The same system keep playing. Now, the same people will go on the African continent and kill all of our good leaders, and then leave in place the bad leader, the corrupt leader, and then work with the corrupt leader. And then they will come back and sit on a national platform and then write book, make movie, write stories, and then says Africans don't know how to lead. Africans are corrupt. But you went and killed our great leader who's supposed to lead. You killed them. Then how can you come back and blame us of the failures of Africa? Did you see that? Did you understand that? You kill Gaddafi and then come back and blame Africans or Libya about how Libya is today. Right? You fought terrorists and things, destroy Sudan, and then come back and say and blame African about Sudan. You support terrorists, right? War again, like you train how they call it Kagame and things. Yuri Museveni today. Look at DRC Congo, and then come back and blame the people of DRC of their circumstances. You see, so the same system keep playing on black people, whether in Africa or out of Africa. It keep playing all at the same times and thing, and we sit and watch and see things going on. Look, folks, this thing is no different. They will put sanction on African nations, right, on African leaders, and then come back and blame that government that they put sanction on that government is not doing the right thing for 8 people. That government is not functioning right. But meanwhile, you just with the government. You just hold the government. All right? You just hold the government from doing nothing to 8 people. But then come back and say the government is bad when you have tied the government too less, tied the government too foot, and then you tell our nation not to make business with our country, and then you stack the country economy, and then come by and blame the nation just because that nation failed to carry on your policies. So again, the issue here is, right, what we're trying to make people to understand. The issue in South Africa, by now, black people, African worldwide, we should understand that this is something funded against the Africans masses. It's not just about the Zulu taking piece of steak, running around, wearing some Zulu clothes, Zulu culture, and then running around, being people, this, that, and whatsoever, and things, right? The Zulu tribe were purposely taken because of their influence, and they are using that very good to the satisfaction, right, of the oppressor. Go ahead. Anything, Natasha, you want to add? And then
Natasha,
yeah,
please.
I'll add a little bit because I know we're close to time, but I just wanted to connect to some of what Toivo said before, and then also what you were bringing up, Frank, in terms of the way in which we're seeing a lot of this happen. The same thing happen, slightly different in different places. And what we have to remember is, so to Toivo's point, I'm gonna try to speak in a way that connects all of this. When he mentioned how the laws when it comes to land and, you know, what it means. Like it has to be, if you're not, you know, doing something industrial to it, you're not using it, and therefore, you know, it could be taken from you. That comes directly out of when we think about the term terra nullius, that when the colonists, when the Spanish were colonizing, were going out there colonizing, and they use this term terra nullius, meaning empty land, and saying that, oh, if the land isn't being used, quote unquote, the way that they see that it should be used, then you can take it, right? This idea of empty lands. And so you're literally seeing European ideas, European ideas that to justified taking other people's land and colonizing them, being used as laws for in the same places that they colonize by people who are the colonized. And so when we talk about colonialism, people have to remember that colonization is not over. And this is a clear example. When, you know, Toivo was explaining that example, it's a clear example. You literally have 1600s European, 1600 or 1500 European laws in your law books determining how you're engaging with the land and how you're operating with each other. And, you know, Fanon talked about that. You know, he mentioned that toward, you know, the end of his book, you know, The Wretched of the Earth, talking about if you're going to do what the Europeans did, then what is the point? If you're just going to be recreating the same thing that Europeans did, when we're talking about, you know, liberation and actually being free. And so this is just to say, and what we're witnessing right now is to show that colonization, as we already know, and as we should know, is not over. It's still in process. It's still going on. So we have not put an end to colonization. This is just another phase of colonization that we're in. And we're seeing, and I think someone else also, because someone said in the chat, like, you know, South Africa is a distraction. It's actually not a distraction in the way that, like, you know, we should just be focusing on this and not other things. But, you know, like, I agree and disagree at, you know, to different points, but I won't go into it. But it's a distraction in a way that we're fighting against each other instead of actually looking at who the real enemy is, which is Europeans, and, you know, them colonizing our lands across the world. We're still at war with Europeans on the continent and in the diaspora, whether it's South America, whether it's in America, whether it's in the Caribbean, and whether it's on the continent. And so thinking about that in the way in which we're continuing to in the way in which colonialism continues right now, and even when we're thinking about somebody else also said in the comment, you know, thinking about those in the north, when we think about the idea that, you know, Africa as a whole is you have North Africa and then you have sub-Saharan Africa. The fact that, you know, you have this kind of distinction between two parts of Africa, and we know also about what's happening in the Sudan, and the fact that, like, the way in which we know there is a lot of anti-Africanness, anti-Blackness within North Africa, and how that is playing into what is happening even within the continent, and also thinking about how what's happening in one part of Africa affects what's happening in another part of Africa. Just like Toivo mentioned what was happening in Zimbabwe and how that affected all of the neighboring countries in the southern part of Africa. How what is happening in the northern part of Africa and what is happening in the Sudan, what's been happening in the Sudan for the last couple of years, for a long time. And when you look into the history of that, which is, you know, a very long, complicated history of what we're seeing even happening in the Sudan and the displacement of the Sudanese, that is also affecting what is happening in other parts of the country. And so all of the ways in which we're being attacked, one from those who are in the Islamic world, in the Arab world, that are anti-Black, that really do not want to see, quote unquote, sub-Saharan Africa rise up and actually be independent. And also how we're seeing what is happening in, you know, Southern Africa, in terms of how, you know, they're fanning flames of, you know, unemployment and dispossession and survival and oppression. And then you're seeing that in the US. And in the same way that you're talking about how South Africa is having, you know, these tensions with other African countries, you're also seeing that same thing being flamed in the US when we're talking about diasporic peoples and African people who are born in the United States.
Yep.
And that also being another thing. And so we're seeing the fans of disunity being flamed. Why? At a specific time when we know critical and major geopolitical politics and moves are being made, that Africa is being positioned for the next, century, and that this is a major moment for Africa to be able to move and stand up, and for other Africans within the diaspora to be able to move and stand up. And so it's no coincidence that these things are happening now. And so to remember the fact that, like, we're seeing on the continent, that I think one of the things that we have to do is be able to see ourselves as Africans, and to be able to see what's happening to us locally, and be able to move in between those two. We cannot get stuck and be like, okay, well, it's just Africa. We don't want to talk about, specific countries and what's happening in those specific countries, or we're only going to focus on what's happening in the specific countries. We have to be able to move fluidly between seeing ourselves as Africans, and then also being able to say, okay, what's happening locally here, and what is the issue here, and how can we make those connections? Because otherwise, I think what's happened over the last couple of years is that the internationalism that comes along with Pan-Africanism has been siloed in many areas. Those of us within the Americas, and particularly Latin America, or the United States, have been made to really see ourselves only looking at what's happening in America, losing that internationalist perspective. And then those of us in Africa, in the ways in which you have connections to Europe, being the migration between Africa into Europe, and what that has entailed, and where people are able to be seen within the Western world, has also been flamed, where now these ideas of putting particular groups of African people as exceptional. Oh, well, Nigerians are exceptional. Oh, Ghanaians are exceptional. Oh, South Africans are exceptional. No, and that's what they're doing there. And the people who are praising you are your enemies, are saying like, oh yeah, you think that, you're different than them. When we know historically, we understood ourselves as an international people who are fighting the same struggle, even though it may look slightly different depending on where our places are. And I think the major distraction is getting all of us to be into these things, but and also convincing us that being an African person or different African groups are inherently troublesome. We inherently cannot get along, as though we are inherently a problem, as opposed to really looking at what we've been talking about here and what you've been pointing out, Frank, that no, we are not inherently a problem. We do not inherently have issues with each other, and that we can't get over. The issue is that the Europeans, the colonization that still exists, are using the same tactics that they have used. And they understand now, in this particular time, as things are shifting worldwide, that they need to make sure that African people worldwide, as Napoleon said, that his whole thing about Haiti was not even just to stop Haiti, but to stop the movement of African people, Black people worldwide. And that is what's happening right now. And if people get caught up in just thinking that, oh, this is inherent of this group, or inherent of that group, or, we're better than this group, or we're better than that group, and engaging in this kind of tribal, diasporic wars, we're going to play right into their hands. And we're not going to be able to take the opportunity that is wide open for us right now, if we were to actually look at it from a historical perspective, to be able to inform what we are seeing happening today, as the West is being destabilized, as you have a president that, is helping to run a country, the country, quote unquote, that they say, is the greatest in the world, blase, blah, this, and, wants to go and kidnap other presidents and do all those things. It's in a vulnerable position. But if you're unable to see that, because you're falling into the trap of, thinking that we're this and we're different, and that we need to be engaging in these, instead of engaging in a historical analysis and learning and in political education that makes us understand we have been united. When Kwame Nkrumah came to the United States, it wasn't on diasporic wars and thinking that. No, it was about unity. When we had our Pan-African meetings, we did that as a group of Africans, even knowing the differences, understanding that no group of people, no matter who you are on this earth, Europeans to be exact, who fought each other, killed each other, genocided each other before they went on to their, to do it to the rest of the world, we're able to even still, with all those differences, come together and decide, well, we want to be the ones who are ruling the world, and so let's put those differences aside as they still do, to make sure that they maintain power. And so we are not a people who are inherently against each other, who inherently have issues that we can't get over, and that we have to be this one monolith, whatever. But and sometimes people misuse this idea, we're not a monolith. Yeah, we're not a monolith, but also that doesn't mean that we need to be siloed and thinking like, oh yeah, if we have these some slight disagreements, or if we have some difference of opinions or views, that we cannot work together and put those to the side. That's what we need to be right now. And so I think that we need to continue on to this conversation about South Africa, because it connects so much to the way in which these fans of disunity, these flames of disunity are being fanned throughout the African world, whether it's on the continent or in the diaspora. And I'll stop there. And Toivo, you can have the last say.
Yeah, Ashe. And so just to kind of bring it together again, I'm going to draw a few global comparisons within the Pan-African world. It's not the same. It is not exactly the same. It's not apples to apples. There are levels of course, ways these comparisons don't work, but I'm trying to give people, particularly I'm speaking a little bit to those in the diaspora, particularly the quote unquote Western diaspora, to sort of get a way, not the way, a way to try to understand some of these things. So I'm new to living in Atlanta, and one of the things I've been learning among just some of the people on the, just the regular people who I be engaging with, is that after Hurricane Katrina, right? After Hurricane Katrina, as we know, a lot of Black people, of course, had to flee out of New Orleans to find places to live, as we all know, right? And in addition to places like Houston, one of the big places that people went to was Atlanta. There was a lot of violence in the city amongst New Orleans cats and Atlanta cats. Many of the Uber drivers who I was talking to sometimes were telling me about how they had to sort of hide their accents, or not say that they were from New Orleans, because there was a lot of violence against them, seeing as they were quote unquote competing with them for some of the limited resources in Atlanta. And this is quote unquote the Black Mecca, right? A lot of activists in Atlanta had to do a lot of work to try to help heal and to repair some of those things, as well, to stop some of the violence that was happening within our communities against each other, right? But you can imagine people who are leaving New Orleans, you're struggling, you are starving, you have to find a way to hustle for your family. You feel me? So you are going to do whatever you can do to kind of help them out, right? And that also is clashing with Black people who were then here in Atlanta, who also are struggling and are starving and are trying to compete over limited resources, right? And there were tensions and there were deaths around that stuff, right? That actually is real. You see what I'm saying? Another example, right, is we all know about what's happening right now with TPS right now, and Haitians and, if you will, Syrians being the main ones to be hit. Let's be keeping a $1.55 amongst people here in the U.S. Do you know how many Africans and Black people are happy that the Haitians get kicked out? There has been so much anti-Haitianness in the Black community in the United States, and this is not just like Black American, if you will, Caribbean Black, others. There has been so much anti-Haitianness that itself has been fueled because of imperialism and colonialism, punishing Haiti for daring to be free. You see what I'm saying? We know the anti-Haitianness is there, and we have to work to fight it, right? On that, during 2020, when there were a whole bunch of protests that were happening, as we know, across the place, one of the more nastier things happening within, in particularly the Bronx and some other places where I was active in 2020, is there were many Dominicans who were attacking Haitians during 2020, saying these people here in their stores are out here, taking their criminals, they're bringing AIDS, they're bringing Ebola, they're bringing all these things. You see what I'm saying? We have to heal on that level. Who's winning from that discussion? Who even set the terms of that discussion? It ain't us, right? And so it's again, if you go to Guyana, for example, and in Trinidad, right? Particularly Guyana, from what I've been hearing, right? And again, I'm not there, I don't live there, I do not organize there, but from those who I know are from there and those cats who I'm connected with, right? It happens every now and then where there's violence against those who you consider Indo-Guyanese, against, if you will, Afro-Guyanese, and vice versa. Usu Kwayana talks about this a lot in terms of how even that itself has been mobilized to have us hate each other. And so these things are very, very important, in my opinion, just so we can understand the global ramifications of these kinds of things, right? I'm happy, Natasha, that you brought up the Edo stuff, right? This idea of who actually is, quote unquote, or if you will, indigenous Afro-American, for lack of a better word, right? Which actually very much is trying to divide Afro-Americans from Africa, as it were, right? You are not that. You are not these people. You see what I'm saying? This is exactly coming from the same root. Even within the Caribbean itself, they have their own issues with each other, right? In terms of how Jamaicans would be seen, or how Haitians are seen, or how Dominicans are seen in certain things. It's so ironic, the quote unquote anti-blackness and anti-Haitianness among many Dominicans and most of the Spanish-speaking Latin American countries hate Dominicans. It's actually so hilarious, right? And they don't like Dominicans because they're seen as black. Like literally, the Spanish that they speak is considered Africanized Spanish, but yet you against Africa and you against Haitians. You see the confusion, right? Like this is exactly what is happening, and South Africa is just simply no different. And so to close off, just for me, I don't want to talk. I'm doing this here because I don't really want to talk about this anymore. Because this on my end, I think other people should be talking about it, and I'll do my best to bring next time if we have something to bring some people from the ground who are doing some work, fighting this on the ground because it's so painful. And it is humiliating. It hurts me to even talk about this, to even see this. I was damn near in tears 2 days ago talking about this with my partner and my other friends because it really hurts, man. It really, really, really hurts. This is painful. I am humiliated as a Pan-Africanist and a Black nationalist activist by what's happening in South Africa, in occupied Azania. And that's why I say occupied Azania versus South Africa. We are not independent there. It's like someone saying Atlanta is the Black Mecca because Black people are free and are in control of their lives in Atlanta. It's not true. You know what I mean? It's not true. We are not, right? I don't care what the media may tell you about how it's free, how good it is to be in Black Atlanta. The only reason why Atlanta feels better to people is because so much of the rest of the U.S. is so effed up. So the bar is very low. The bar is at the floor. And to say that, to say Atlanta is 6 inches off the floor doesn't mean much. You feel me? And South Africa, it's very similar. And what you're seeing right now, sure, even if all the quote unquote African immigrants there were to leave, they would just turn on each other because the social economic conditions hasn't changed. So then it will be this back to the, if you will, the ethnic groups fighting each other. Last point, and then I close on this, is that one of the things I see in the comments, people are talking about distractions, et cetera, et cetera. Sure, we can say a lot of these things are distractions, right? And I see comments on AES, right? And again, people, we can just talk about these things, right? And part of what the colonists wanted to do, particularly post World War II, when the Europeans realized how weak they were, right? What they had to do was they had to conquer, they had to control these 4 zones on the continent: South Africa, Egypt, Nigeria, and Congo. Those 4 were seen as very important strategic things. If you look at the CIA reports, the State Department reports, you look at the British intelligence, right? MI6 and these folks, those 4 places were targeted, particularly because the understanding was that between just those 4, they have every damn mineral under the sun. Congo by itself could feed all of Southern Africa if it wanted to, just off of what it could produce. They had to make sure that those 4 places were completely either put under chaos or had regimes in power that did what the West wanted them to do. Because if those 4 hubs, just in terms of a political economy, industrial sense, could ever get themselves together and to be doing what they needed to be doing, that would radiate outwards to the rest of the continent. And look what they have done. Congo, Nigeria too, right? It's as if, for example, what's happening in South Africa, many of my Nigerian friends will go on and say, "Hello, Toivo, it's not Christians versus Muslims." Is that true? Or is it Yoruba versus Igbo? Huh? We all remember Biafra. We remember what has been happening even before then, right? These are the ways they are trying to divide everything up. So AES, I'm sorry, I see the person in the chat talking about AES. The reality is AES will fail if the rest of the continent fails. So the AES, they will not be able to do anything if us in Southern Africa, East Africa, North Africa are all colonized and are killing each other. It would just spread to them. So AES needs to take what's happening in South Africa seriously and occupy Azania seriously, because that right there is going to impact you too, and it already has. So that's why I'm saying we are all interlinked. It's why we must heal Haiti and Dominican Republic. We must heal that, because that thing is radiating outwards. Brazil right now, the largest Black population in the world, just in terms of numbers, outside of Nigeria, is in Brazil. Do you see any Black leaders in the Brazilian government? Even under the person Lula, who all these leftists tell us is a friend of the Blacks? Right? Do you see them having land ownership, or are they living in the favelas and the hoods? Are they living there without land? Even though there are treaties around quilombos, go ask them if Blacks feel empowered even in Salvador, in Pernambuco, in Bahia. So this is right. Colombia right now, they've elected the reactionaries into power. There are black people in Colombia too. You see what I'm saying? So I think we need to look at it in a broader sense that we are all interconnected. So AES will fail. I say it to the one in the chat in the comment who's speaking about AES. It will fail if Azania fails. And Azania will fail if AES and other different things around the continent and the African world fail. We are all interconnected in that sense, and we all must do everything we can do to ensure each other's success, because that, again, we are an interconnected people. The chaos of war will just spread. You see what I'm saying? And as a Namibian myself, we have to watch what's happening there, because we have also flirted with this kind of rhetoric ourselves. The only thing that makes us a little bit different is our population is less, our economy is smaller, and because of the desert nature of our country, the majority of the people are either in the capital or in the north where I'm from, and so that changes some of these dynamics, right? But some of that tension is also there, particularly with this gas and oil that they've discovered in Namibia. What does it mean to redistribute that among the masses? Okay. So with that, I just give my love, prayer to all my friends and comrades in Azania. I have friends who've messaged me, who I see their messages, the fear, just the pain, how humiliated they are, just how unwanted and how confused they are. And I hear you, and it's just sad. It really breaks my heart, right? And I don't like Malema, but I do agree with him on one level, just begging people for forgiveness, to say, just forgive us, and we are sorry, because this is wrong. And I'm so sorry that this is happening, and I am humiliated that this is happening. The only thing I can do is to give people some of the histories and some of the social context around why it is happening, and to reemphasize that for us who are Black nationalists, if we fail in the United States, if we fail in the Caribbean, if we fail in Brazil, if we fail in AES, if we fail in Azania, this is what's going to happen. This is the cost of our failure. And quite frankly, you cannot just begin. So it also means those of you in the past who were supporting ANC, Mandela, 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 then this is your fault too. You must take ownership for supporting bluntly the wrong movement. This is also when we have our internationalism, we must make sure that we back the right movement. If you back the wrong one, just like South Africa did, that's what people did with South Africa, this is what now happens. People backed the ANC. People were forced to back the ANC in many circumstances. And this is now all their fault. It just simply is. And so if people are thinking about solutions and people are talking about boycotts, I don't actually mind the boycotts, not because it's going to impact the Black folks, it's because it's going to impact the whites. So quite frankly, I have no problem with the boycotts, precisely because it will target those whites. That is what must happen. Okay, so with that, I mean, I just believe in the future. I know we have activists on the ground who are trying to heal some of the tensions there. I still am hopeful, but the last few days and weeks really have been very hard, and I'm just so sorry to everyone who's been impacted by this violence. As a Black nationalist, as an Azanian Black nationalist, as a Pan-Africanist, we are sorry, and we have to do better.
All right, thank you, Tavo. Before we leave, right, I have a video. And by the way, let me make this clear to South Africa, right? We are not saying what you are fighting for, right? We are not saying it's wrong. Could it be that you are fighting the wrong people? Basically, that's what we're trying to say here. Could it be that you are fighting the wrong people? Could it be that you are going against the wrong people? Could it be that you are not really solving the problem because your economy are not being held by the people you call foreigner, right? Could it be that the government is silent because the government know that they have failed, and it is in the government favor that you are not targeting the government, you are not asking the government, you are not cautioning the government, but you are going about the wrong way? Because imagine, election is right around the corner, the South African election is right around the corner sometime next year or so. So could it be a distraction, right? Now, what we have discussed here, right, is not that we are supporting foreigners. That's not what we're trying to say here. We want you to understand the game that is being played on the mind of African people every time, right? Now, we want you to watch this video, right? This video also shows statistics about the crime rate, who commit crime and whatsoever in South Africa, because the belief of the protester, the belief of the anti-immigrant believer is that immigrants are the one creating the problem, are the one bringing in the drugs, are the criminal and all of those things, right? Because that's the narrative that, or the hook that is being used. Again, Natasha Tavo, thank you so much for this discussion. And it was very great. And I see the interaction, the comments, and all of those things. I see, the our people that are watching their view and all of those things. And I see, this discussion. Like you said, I didn't want to discuss of Africa. I have said I don't want to discuss it because it's meaningless. But again, you took a different perspective, like you want us to analyze it. And thank you so much for bringing this out. And if you have another topics, anytime, and so just hit it out. We're going to make sure we come out here. But having said that, let's discuss this video so that we can put this thing to rights.
Rosettenville, Berea, Deep Sloot, Musina, Cape Town, and parts of the East Rand. But is it true? This helper asks one question only. Do foreigners commit most crimes in South Africa? Not whether some foreigners commit crime, some do. Not whether some foreign nationals are involved in drug markets, counterfeit goods, illegal mining, vehicle smuggling, document fraud, or cross-border trafficking. Some are, but that is not the claim being made on the street. The street claim is bigger. The claim says foreigners commit most crime in South Africa. That is not a feeling question, that is a numbers question. This is an audit. No slogans, no toying. The numbers matter. The structure matters. Let us start with the control. Before immigration is even introduced, South Africa already has an extreme violence baseline. According to the South African Police Service, from October to December 2025, South Africa recorded 6,351 murder cases. That is in 1 quarter. 3 months, about 69 murders per day. In the same quarter, the country recorded 175,210 contact crime cases. Contact crime includes murder, attempted murder, assault with intent to cause serious bodily harm, common assault, sexual offences, common robbery, and robbery with aggravating circumstances. So the first point is this. South Africa is not a low-crime country suddenly distorted by foreigners. South Africa is already a high-violent society before the immigration question is added. Now compare that to the global control. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime placed the global homicide rate at about 5.8 per 100,000 people in 2021. Africa's regional homicide rate was about 12.7 per 100,000 people. The Americas were about 15 per 100,000 people. Europe, Asia, and Oceania were far lower. Now look at South Africa on the World Bank. Indicator sourced from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, South Africa's most recent homicide rate observation was 43.7 per 100,000 people in 2022. That is the control point. South Africa's murder rate is not just high by local emotion, it is high by international comparison, so the proper question becomes sharper. If foreign nationals are only a small share of the population but are said to commit most crimes, then the conviction, prison and crime data should show massive overrepresentation. Does it? The answer is no. Statistics. South Africa's census. 2022 recorded 2,418,197 people born outside South Africa. The total population was about 62 million. That means foreign-born residents were about 3.9% of the population. A small minority, Zimbabwe was the largest sending country, with just over 1 million Zimbabwe-born residents recorded in South Africa. Now pause there. If a population group is about 4% of the country, but the claim is that it commits most crime, the evidence would have to be overwhelming. Not vague, not emotional, not based on one video, not based on one arrest. Overwhelming, but the available evidence does not support that claim. Africa Check reviewed available data and reported that undocumented immigrants made up, on average, just over 2% of people convicted of crimes over a 5-year period. The Institute for Security Studies also found no evidence that foreign nationals are responsible for most crime in South Africa. It cited prison data showing that foreign nationals made up 7.5% of people in South African prisons at the time of that analysis. 7.5% is not zero. 2% is not zero. But neither number is most. That is the audit line. Foreign nationals are present in the crime system. Some foreign nationals commit crimes. Some undocumented migrants commit offences. Some syndicates include foreign nationals, but the available evidence does not support the claim that foreigners commit most crimes in South Africa. Now, this is where the story becomes complicated, because some crime types are highly visible when foreign nationals are involved. In Johannesburg, especially Hillbrow, Yeoville, Berea, Rosettenville, and parts of the inner city, public concern often focuses on drug dealing, counterfeit goods, undocumented trading, hijacked buildings, problem. It is not imaginary. In Cape Town, especially around gang-affected areas such as Delft, Gugulethu, Mitchell's Plain, Nyanga, and parts of the Cape Flats, the more visible problem is not immigration. It is gang violence, illegal firearms, extortion, drug markets, and organized local networks. In KwaZulu-Natal, including Durban and surrounding transport corridors, the visible fears often include truck attacks, business robbery, extortion, drug networks, and politically connected violence. At Beitbridge, Musina, and the Limpopo corridor, the concern is different. There, the pressure is illegal entry, smuggling, document fraud, cross-border goods movement, vehicle trafficking, and border control weakness. So the honest answer is not that foreigners are innocent of all crime. That would be false. The honest answer is this. Some foreign nationals are involved in specific crime types, especially where cross-border movement creates opportunity. Smuggling, document fraud, or counterfeit goods, illegal mining, certain drug networks. Vehicle trafficking, cross-border syndicates, but that is not the same as saying foreigners commit most crime in South Africa. Those are two different claims. A foreign national suspect in a drug case in Johannesburg does not prove that foreigners commit most crime. A foreign national suspect in a robbery case in Pretoria does not prove that foreigners commit most crime. A foreign-linked illegal mining arrest in Gauteng does not prove that all migrants are criminals. A cross-border vehicle smuggling case near Limpopo does not prove that foreigners are driving South Africa's national crime burden. That is how public panic works. It turns a case into a category, it turns a suspect into a population, it turns visible crime into total crime. And that is where the street argument becomes dangerous, because the most visible crime is not always the most common crime. A foreign-linked kidnapping case travels quickly on social media. A foreign-owned spaza shop dispute becomes community news. An illegal mining raid involving undocumented migrants becomes a national talking point. But the ordinary murder, after and argument in a tavern, the assault between people who know each other, the domestic killing inside a residence, the robbery by local criminals, or the gang shooting in a known local hotspot may remain inside the normal crime machine. It does not always become an immigration story. The South African Police Service numbers show why that matters. In the October to December 2025, crime data, the largest identified murder category, was not foreign national crime. It was arguments, misunderstandings, road rage, and provocation. That category alone was linked to 1,158 murders. Robbery was linked to 309 murders. Gang-related violence was linked to 276 murders. Vigilantism or mob justice was linked to 340 murders. Taxi-related conflict was linked to 52 murders. Illicit mining was linked to 16 murders. Those numbers do not describe one immigrant-led crime wave. They describe a national violence system: public place violence, residence violence, alcohol-linked violence, robbery violence, gang violence, taxi conflict, revenge, violence, mob justice, and ordinary interpersonal violence that becomes fatal. The location data also matters. In that same quarter, 3,217 murders happened in public places such as streets, open fields, parks, beaches, parking areas, and recreational spaces. Another 1,825 murders happened at residences connected to victims, perpetrators, family, friends, or neighbors. Liquor outlets, including taverns, shebeens, pubs, nightclubs, and bottle stores, accounted for 249 murders. Again, the pattern is broader than immigration. South Africa has a crime system. That system includes violent streets, weak detection, organized crime, illegal firearms, alcohol-linked violence, public place conflict, gang pressure, transport corridor crime, and household-level violence. Immigration is part of the national pressure. But immigration is not the whole crime machine. The Kopje Journal and Review understands this to mean that South Africa's crime debate is being compressed into immigration language because immigration is visible, emotional, and politically usable, but the numbers do not support the slogan. Foreigners do not commit most crimes in South Africa. South Africans commit most crimes in South Africa. That does not mean migration management is irrelevant. It is very relevant. South Africa needs proper border control. It needs credible documentation systems. It needs stronger home affairs capacity. It needs serious action against illegal mining, trafficking, document fraud, counterfeit goods, drug networks, and vehicle smuggling syndicates. It needs to prosecute foreign criminals and local criminals with the same seriousness. But if the country pretends crime is mainly foreign, it misdiagnoses the crisis. And when a country misdiagnoses crime, it wastes enforcement energy. The real crime map is broader. Johannesburg has inner city enforcement problems. Pretoria, Mamelodi East, Alexandra, Kempton Park, and the East Rand face robbery, hijacking, and urban syndicate pressure. Cape Town has gang and firearm pressure. Durban has transport corridor and organized crime concerns. Gauteng has illegal mining and extortion pressure. Limpopo has border and smuggling pressure. The Eastern Cape has high murder pressure in places such as Mthatha and other district hotspots. None of that can be solved by blaming foreigners as one category. Let me be very clear. The correct position is not softness on crime. The correct position is accuracy on crime. Arrest the foreign national who commits crime. Arrest the South African who commits crime. Break the syndicate. Trace the firearm. Fix the docket. Strengthen prosecution. Protect witnesses. Control the border. Clean up documentation. Target the actual network. But do not replace policing with population blame. That is not strategy. That is emotional outsourcing. This is not a foreigner crime story. It is a state capacity story. It is a policing story. It is a documentation story. It is a border control story. It is a public trust story. And above all, it is a crime diagnosis story. Because if the diagnosis is wrong, the treatment will fail. So, final answer. Do foreigners commit most crimes in South Africa? No. The evidence does not support that claim. Foreign nationals are involved in some crimes. Some undocumented migrants commit offences. Some syndicates include foreign nationals. Some crime types have cross-border features. But the national crime burden remains overwhelmingly domestic. The country's crime problem is already severe before immigration is added to the analysis. That is the part the slogan hides. South Africa is not safe because foreigners arrived. South Africa is unsafe because the crime system is deep, violent, adaptive, and poorly contained. The real issue is not that foreigners commit most crimes. The real issue is that South Africa has a severe crime system, a strained immigration system, a weak enforcement system, and a public trust crisis colliding at the same time. Thank you for watching. This is the Kopje Journal and Review, forensic analysis for the African perspective. If
All right, folks. Once again, this is WCC every Saturday or Sunday. Once again, I am your host. This is Frank, and thank you, Natasha, to be on, and Tovia, thank you so much for this great topic that you brought out for us to discuss. And, you re-energize, me to talk about South Africa because actually I didn't want to, because I didn't want to go with that perspective. I didn't want, for any this unity to come, among African because I know this is being planned and so forth and things. But again, you wanted to analyze it, and thank you so much for your deep knowledge that you brought to the topic and to the audience. And we look forward again to discussing, more updates. Natasha, do you have anything to, conclude?
I do want to say thank you all for joining us in this conversation. Thank you, Toivo, for being here and leading this conversation. I think the conversation is not over. I do think that we need to continue to talk about this because I think that what it is that what is happening with across the diaspora and on the continent in terms of these things and others, we have to work through them so we can get to the other side. There's no way that you can not work through your issues. You can't sweep your issues under the rug. There's the work that we have to do internally so that we can beat our enemy, like they mentioned in someone mentioned in the chat. Yeah, the major crime committers of this world against people and the planet in general are Europeans, and that they've got some of us to support them in that and to also engage with them in that. And so within ourselves, we have to fight. There's an African proverb that says that if there's no enemy from within, no enemy from without can hurt you. So while we're doing this, we have to fight on both ends. We have to fight through the stuff that we have to fight through so that we can heal together and work together. Like Malcolm said, there could not be any black-white unity until there is first black unity. And so in order for us to get to that point of unity and to the things that we have to settle our quarrels, and we have to come to learn and understand what's going on with each other, come to learn and understand the histories that have affected us, the white supremacist mentality, that capitalistic Euro-Christian white domination mentality that has been internalized on different levels by us in different places, that is causing some of this and that they're able to benefit off of. So we have to heal, and the way that we're going to heal is to be able to have these conversations honestly, with historical context and understanding and clear eyes, so that we can be able to move past these issues, so that we can unite, so that we can fight the ultimate fight, because that's the time that we're in. That's what we're moving towards. So I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate everyone for being here. And let's continue to, work through this. It's hard work, but it has to be done.
Thank you so much, Natasha. Tove, you still on? You want to give 1 minute and then close it out? We'll leave.
Yeah, Israeletu e Africa. That's what the PAC said. Essentially, whose land is this? Africa, right? Israeletu e Africa, right? And that's what the PAC said, and that's what I want to go back to. Like, we are all in this together. And so I think also as Africans and Pan-African peoples, part of what that also is we have to see what's happening down there in occupied Azania as also part of our own struggle, right? It's an internal family thing. So I don't divorce myself from what's happening there, the good and the bad. That's also, if there is a little critique of internationalism sometimes that I would give, is that sometimes we only want to take the quote unquote good things, but then we want to ignore the effed up stuff. And I think we can't do that. We have to do all of it. And so I take responsibility for what's happening there because I believe in United Africa and an African world. So the negative, we have to be responsible for it, as well as uplift the positive.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys for being on here, and to the viewer, to our supporter, to the family. Thank you so much. This is today's presentation that we had to give you to bring out. Again, you be the judge. Was it great? Is it worth? Did we speak the truth? Were we biased? It's up to you. We want to see your analysis in the comment section after the recording. See you all, guys. Peace.
white power structure because that's all we have in America. And the white power structure today is just as much interested in perpetuating slavery as the white power structure was 100 years ago. Only now they use modern methods of doing so. And realizing that the black people in this country are waking up and becoming filled with a desire to be looked upon as men and as human beings, the white power structure to slow down that struggle for freedom and human dignity uses tricks. 100 years ago they could do it with chains. Today they use tricks. And one of the tricks that they've invented is this token integration. To get Negro, so-called Negro leaders to accept a few token crumbs of integration that don't solve any problem for the masses of black people in this country whatsoever, but it does make the hand-picked Negroes be satisfied to slow down the cry of the masses. And a good example of that is as soon as the spirit of rebellion or revolution began to spread among the masses of black people in this country, and they began to take an active part, and they showed that they weren't